I never thought I would find myself in a position where I'd owe money to the mafia, but here I am, staring at the wall of my dimly lit apartment, feeling the weight of my decisions clawing at my throat. My life was simple enough before this mess, filled with late nights at the coffee shop where I worked, a smattering of friends who never quite grasped the depths of my anxiety, and a degree in art I never used. It all started with that rogue decision to lend some cash to my cousin, Alex, who promised he'd pay me back but instead fell further into a spiral of debts he couldn't manage. I was naive, thinking that I could trust him and would be shielded from the troubles that followed. Just a few weeks later, a couple of intimidating figures showed up at my door, their tattoos swirling with ominous tales, their expressions stern. I remember how my heart raced as I tried to follow their conversation. It was a blurring mix of threats and cold promises, all hinting that my cousin had taken a loan from them, one with terms I never wanted to know. They demanded my help to settle his debts, a fair share, they claimed, but it was more than I could ever afford, leaving me with an insurmountable weight. My anxiety turned into sheer panic as the reality of my situation sank in. Every night afterward was filled with sleepless worry as I stared at the ceiling, visions of their faces creeping into my thoughts, fueling my fears that I might be their next target if I couldn't scrape together the cash. I tried talking to Alex, but he simply shrugged off his responsibility, deep in denial as he licked his wounds and wallowed in his futile dreams of success. Friends, whenever I attempted to confide in them, would bless me with that infuriatingly sympathetic look, thinking that my plight was simply a relatable tale from the rat race of adulthood, but in reality, I was grappling with monster-like figures lurking in the corners of my reality. I spent countless nights pacing, gathering excuses for when they would come knocking again, unable to shake the feeling that I was being suffocated by the tightrope I've had to walk ever since that awful day. Days turned into weeks, and my stress began manifesting physically, headaches that wouldn't relent, that churning stomach, the way my hands trembled whenever I heard a knock at the door, and how every unfamiliar face in the grocery store made me flinch with panic. But then, there came a strange moment of clarity. I realized I couldn't live my life in fear any longer, the chaos had spiraled into a prison of my own making. That night, I took a deep breath and flipped my phone open, scrolling through my contacts until I reached one person I hadn't spoken to in months, my childhood friend Jamie. Jamie had dipped her toes into the world of freelance journalism, and while I had always admired her tenacity, I was a little ashamed for not keeping in touch. We talked for hours, and after I poured my heart out about Alex and the mafia, she listened without judgment, her voice soothing and steady. Somehow, amidst all the panic, I found strength in just sharing my burden, and Jamie agreed to help in any way she could. Together, we crafted a plan, not to pay the debts I owed, but to confront the situation with clarity. She called in favors from her contacts, learning more about the mafia's operations in our city and finding potential loopholes I could exploit to shield myself from any violent repercussions. It wasn't a foolproof plan, and it required a lot of deep breaths and late-night strategizing, but I finally felt like I was regaining control. I never did find the money to pay off those debts, nor did I plan to. Instead, I cut off any ties with Alex and contacted local authorities to report the escalating threats I had been receiving. It felt like a weight had been lifted, and I discovered strength in the vulnerability of asking for help. As I sit on my couch now, huddled in my blanket, I think about how the confrontation turned into a bittersweet closure for me, and although I'm still buried in the remnants of what my life used to be, I'm on my way to rebuilding it. No longer a pawn in someone else's mess, I finally glimpse a future not overshadowed by debt or despair. And who knows, maybe one day, I'll be able to recount this experience with laughter rather than anxiety. Update: it's been a few months since I faced those demons, and while my finances are still shaky, I've taken the plunge into freelance work myself, learning graphic design to help others express their stories as mine once were silenced. I still hear about Alex, and the troubling stories coming from our old neighborhood, but the thought of returning to that life of shame and fear makes my heart feel lighter. I'm still working through it all, one graphic at a time. As the months rolled on, I found solace in the rhythmic cadence of my new freelance life, where each keystroke and brushstroke brought me deeper into a world where creativity flourished, unfettered by the chains of past mistakes. I had made a conscious choice to leave behind the weight of my debts and the lingering shadow of that encounter with the mafia. It was as if I had finally taken off a pair of shoes that were 2 sizes too small. My small apartment morphed into an art studio, with sketches lining the walls and a cluttered desk that spoke to the fervor of my newfound passions. While the stained glass light of the setting sun streamed through my window, I was propelled by an insatiable urge to tell stories, my own stories, but also those of others who had suffered the same silencing I once endured. I reflected on the way the narrative had transformed within me, where once I felt shackled by shame, I now carried a sense of purpose, using my experiences not only to avoid the dark clutches of my past but to illuminate the paths of others. Freelancing was unpredictable, and some weeks the tenuous security of my finances tugged at my nerves, but each job brought in just enough to keep me afloat, like a small buoy in choppy waters. One particular project, a visual narrative about the struggles of an up-and-coming musician trapped under the thumb of a greedy label, struck a chord with me. As I crafted illustrations that mirrored his struggles, I recalled the tight grip of fear that once held my world in check. I couldn't help but channel some of my own anxieties into that work. It felt comforting to remember that artists often pulled from their wells of pain, transforming turmoil into something beautiful. And with each completed assignment, a thrill coursed through me, not just because of the paycheck but because I was helping someone tell their story, lifting it from the confines of silence. But still, there were days when silence became an unwelcome visitor, nudging me with memories of that life I had fled. I occasionally ran into old acquaintances from the neighborhood during errand runs, their faces painted with lingering questions that only I could read. I felt their curiosity piercing through the tentative smiles they offered. Did I ever pay off my debts? Was I still in danger of repercussions? I found myself dodging these encounters, feeling as if they were unwelcome echoes of a past I wished to bury. Despite this unease, I strategically avoided any discussions surrounding that chapter of my life, substituting small talk with a wall of careful deflection. The further I drifted from Alex, the friend who had led me to those dark shores, the more I began to understand that this new boundary was necessary. I still cared for what he once meant to me, but friendships shaped in desperation often lost their footing, particularly in the face of dire circumstances. There were days when I felt the pangs of guilt, remembering how I had distanced myself from him, yet I reminded myself that sometimes the hardest decisions are those we make for our own well-being. I had to be my own priority, and in this, I understood that self-care was essential in untying myself from the anchors of fear I had once known. Life took on a different rhythm after that. I kept to my routine of early mornings filled with coffee and quiet contemplation, where I regrouped and recharged before jumping into the whirlwind of deadlines and projects. I reached out to supportive platforms online where I could share what I had learned about graphic design, allowing me to inspire others hoping to escape from their own silent stories. Every connection felt like an act of reclamation. I soon realized that while life's challenges might not erase themselves, we hold the power to choose how we face them. And just when I thought I had built up enough distance from my intertwined past, I received a message one night, a notification that sent a chill down my spine. It was a cryptic message from a number I didn't recognize, void of any context, simply reading, "We need to talk." My heart raced and dread pooled in my stomach. Had Alex reached out? Or was there someone else looking to pull me back into that life, a reminder that I could never truly escape the consequences of my choices? In the end, I chose hope over fear, deciding to respond. I was done with the shadows of my past. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about standing firm in the life I had built. If there was any offer or threat lurking behind that message, I would face it head on, not as the scared person I once was, but as an empowered individual who learned to express rather than suppress. With every breath, I reminded myself that I owed my life to those unyielding graphics I created, each a testament to resilience, an ode to stories that needed to be shared. If there was anything I had learned from this chapter, it's that I wouldn't let my past dictate my future. One way or another, I would write my own ending. As the months rolled by, I found myself lost in the rhythm of my new life, my mornings filled with the sound of digital brushes sweeping across my tablet, and my evenings immersed in a vibrant community of fellow creators who understood the struggles of battling inner demons. Those dark days of financial turmoil and mob connections felt like distant memories, mere shadows in the bright glow of my newfound identity. But every so often, a chill would creep into my soul, and I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the looming figures from my past return to collect what was owed. It was in those moments that I focused on the projects at hand, pouring my heart into each design as if it were my very lifeline. I attended design meetups and workshops, shared my works in progress on social media, and even started offering my services to local nonprofits, knowing how healing storytelling can be. I spoke with clients who, like me, carried burdens of their own, and through visual narratives, I could help them uncover and express their truths, much like my own. Yet, inquisitiveness sometimes took over, especially when I heard whispers about Alex, my old neighbor whose heavy footsteps and menacing glances had once suffocated me with fear. Rumors traveled through our circles like wildfire, tales of his increasingly desperate and reckless actions. It made me a bit anxious, knowing that he could still be out there. One night, after a long day of collaborating on a mural for mental health awareness, I found myself at a local cafe, fiddling with the remnants of my latte, contemplating whether I should reach out to some of my old friends. I wanted to ask, just to get some sense of the neighborhood without stepping back into the lion's den. Hesitations bubbled within me, a mix of urgency and dread, knowing that once you tread back into someone else's world, your past could pull you back in like a riptide. But ultimately, I decided to stay put, cloaked in the security of my new identity. I busied myself with deadlines, balancing aesthetics with client expectations, and reveling in the flow of creativity. Soon, my portfolio burgeoned with pieces that resonated with people far and wide, art both whimsical and sobering. However, what started as therapy gradually morphed into a burgeoning business, and as my confidence grew, so too did my ambition. I scheduled a meeting with a small gallery, eager to showcase my work, relishing the thought of presenting my stories in a public forum, where perhaps others could find healing and inspiration. The night of the gallery opening was a mosaic of excitement and anxiety. I wore a dress that felt too tight and polished my illustrations to pristine perfection. As I stood by my booth, chatting with curious onlookers about my creative process, I felt a sense of pride enveloping me. For the first time, I could see the fruits of my labor unfolding, liberating stories grasping for air in this vibrant, public space. But deep down, the familiar gnawing of insecurity persisted. What if someone recognized me as the girl who had been tangled in mafia ties? Then, just as I found solace in the supportive chatter around me, the door swung open, and my heart sank. There he stood, Alex, just as I remembered him, but sharper, with a hardness in his eyes that felt chillingly familiar. Time had transformed him, muting some of the buoyancy we'd once shared while hardening his features into something menacing. I thought about slinking away or hiding behind my easel, but instead, I stood my ground, breathing deeply, reminding myself of the evolution I'd undergone. The world fell silent as he approached me, a casual expression plastered over his face, piercing me with a penetrating gaze. I braced myself, ready to stand up to the image of fear I had once carried. "Congratulations," he said, his tone surprisingly even. "I heard you're doing well for yourself," he continued, scanning my artwork, which was now a testament to my resilience, my freedom. He seemed genuine, but I couldn't shake the weight of uncertainty. "Thanks, Alex," I replied, my voice steady, the apprehension coiling within me like a tight spring. "You too, I've heard things." I chose my words carefully, every syllable curated to extract a hint at his intentions. He shrugged, and a shadow crossed his face, the facade managing to slip ever so slightly. "Just trying to stay afloat, like anyone else," he said, an edge creeping back into his voice, hinting at bygone days where our lives were intertwined through fear. The conversation felt like a precarious dance, and I was eager to end it before the tempo shifted unfavorably. "But things are different now," I said firmly, allowing every word to hit the air like a splash of cold water. He nodded, but I could see the faintest trace of regret flicker in his eyes. "Yeah, I guess we all change. Anyway, good to see you doing well," he muttered, stepping back, a reluctant smile grazing his lips before he vanished into the crowd. The weight of that moment hung in the air long after he left, my heart racing as adrenaline surged through me. I stepped back into my booth, enveloped by the warmth of my friends and admirers, and I felt that perhaps those old stories didn't have much power over me anymore. As the night winded down, strangers offered congratulations, and I even captured a few moments in photographs, each image creating its own narrative of overcoming and resilience. Each laugh exchanged and each compliment offered was a reminder that I had taken control of my story, rewriting it one brushstroke at a time. I may have owed my past a small portion of my existence, but my future? That was entirely mine to shape. And what a beautiful work of art it had become. When I first slid into the driver's seat of my Tesla, it felt like the dawn of a new era, not just for me but for how I viewed modern life and technology. I remember the tingling thrill of excitement, the way the soft hum of the electric engine promised a future unshackled from the noise and pollution of the past. My friends ridiculed me then, calling me a tech nerd and mocking my decision to invest in a glorified computer on wheels, but I brushed it off, intoxicated by the sleek design and the allure of sustainability. Over the months, my affinity for the car deepened. I loved the dopamine rush of the instant torque when I pressed the accelerator, the way I could summon my voice assistant to conjure up music, directions, or even a bit of levity from the mundane daily commute. However, everything changed one autumn afternoon when my routine drive home was suddenly interrupted by an unsettling event. Just as I was merging onto the highway, another driver flashed their headlights, gesturing frantically as they maneuvered around me. Confused, I peered into my rearview mirror and saw a family in an old minivan, clearly in distress. My therapy dog, Barkley, who sat beside me with his head resting lazily on my arm, seemed to sense the tension. I slowed down, pulling to the shoulder of the road, my heart racing with a combination of anxiety and curiosity. As I stepped out, the chill of the evening air hit me and I felt the weight of judgment from passing cars, all of them seemingly aware of this strange, spontaneous moment unfolding. The family rushed out of their minivan, a woman in a white blouse and a man with an ashen face, clutching a small child who appeared to be choking. In an instant, every part of me screamed to help. My heart raced as I recalled my first aid training from years ago. With an urgency that drowned my fear, I rushed toward them, my Tesla's sleek lines glimmering in the afternoon sun, a beacon of both technology and newfound responsibility. After a chaotic few minutes, punctuated by the sounds of desperation and gasps for breath, I managed to assist the child, urging them to cough and finally releasing a small object that had lodged in their throat. Relief washed over the family, whose tears now reflected gratitude rather than panic. I could feel their weight lift just as I felt my own pulse calming in the aftershocks of that dangerous moment. But as I turned to return to my car, a thought crept into my mind, knitting itself with fear. Would they see me as just some tech-savvy guy with a fancy car, not a hero, but merely a pawn of materialism? The fear lingered, reminding me of the conversations about the elitism often associated with electric vehicles. I climbed back into my Tesla, feeling not just drained but a little ashamed, questioning the world I inhabited and whether I'd ever truly been one of them, the nice people who drove simple cars, lived simple lives, and were genuinely a part of the community. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of disconnection as I pulled up online to a popular subreddit, r/AskReddit. I composed a post that translated my turmoil into words, articulating both my pride in my car and my concerns about how it could segregate me from others. After hitting post, I let the debate swirl in my mind while I lay in bed, the glow of my screen illuminating the somber shadows of my room. The responses came flooding in, many sympathized with my plight while others dismissed my feelings as trivial, mere echoes of guilt for disdainful wealth. The engagement tugged on my emotions. Some commenters shared similar experiences, while others recounted how their Teslas had become a symbol of status, painting a picture that was both vibrant and troubling. For the next few weeks, I grappled with the dichotomy between my love for the car and the vision of an isolated future it might represent. It wasn't until an opportunity arose, a local charity organizing an event for underprivileged youth where the community could discuss electric vehicles and how they could benefit everyone, that the fog of confusion began to dissipate. I offered to bring my Tesla, eager to share what drew me to it while also encouraging accessibility and understanding, hoping to bridge that gap I felt separating me from others. And there it was, as kids climbed in and excitedly pushed buttons, their faces lighting up with joy, I witnessed something revealing and profound. It wasn't about the material, it was about sharing experiences, laughter, and connection. As I left the event that evening, the smile on my face mirrored the sunset, a mix of relief and budding hope. I understood then that it wasn't the car that defined me, but the choices I made with it that could reshape my relationship with my community. As for my post on Reddit, I returned to it to share my experience and reflect on how I transformed my initial feelings of isolation into connection. The thread had blossomed with a variety of stories, some filled with heartwarming outcomes, others serving as a reminder that within the vastly sprawling universe of technology, it's our shared humanity that ultimately matters. I realized that despite my car's sleekness and the status it might convey, it was just a vehicle, both literally and metaphorically, for deeper connections, and as the day faded into night, the hum of the electric engine became a melody of promise, one that I eagerly continued to explore with an open heart and mind. As I drove home under the blanket of twilight, the blue glow of the dashboard illuminated my face, casting soft shadows that danced to the hum of the electric motor. I couldn't help but think of all the interactions I had that day, the threads weaving together a tapestry of shared experiences. The stories I had read and those I had bravely shared of my own made me realize that there was more to owning a Tesla than the sleek, cutting-edge technology or the environmental consciousness it represented. It was about the connections I was forging, each encounter igniting a spark of camaraderie that I had previously thought impossible within the isolating confines of technology. I had initially approached the announcement of the salute with a twinge of apprehension. The idea of gathering with hundreds of fellow owners and waving at strangers felt oddly intimidating. Yet, as I parked my car alongside a sea of gleaming Teslas, I felt an unexpected thrill of belonging. Strangers exchanged knowing smiles and nods, acknowledgement of a shared choice that seemed almost sacred. When we all raised our arms in a salute, I felt a swell of joy unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was as if, for just a moment, we transcended the labels we often wore in the wider world, parent, worker, neighbor, and became simply Tesla owners, a tribe bound by our decision to embrace a different future. As I navigated the quiet streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that last evening's gathering had awakened something profound within me. An urge to connect further, to not just speak about my car but to dip my toes into interpersonal relationships, the kind that thrive outside of a screen. I might have started as a lonely owner with ethereal goals of sustainability, but now I felt equipped to invite others into my life, if only for a brief coffee or a chat about shared journeys. I parked my Tesla in the garage, still reverberating with the energy of the day, and could almost hear the echoes of laughter and stories traded among friends. I picked up my phone, and for the first time, I didn't see it as an intrusive device but rather as a window to my next potential connection. Scrolling through the recent threads, I stumbled upon a post asking for recommendations for local meetups for Tesla owners. A small grin tugged at my lips, and within moments I had commented with my interest and an invitation for a casual coffee outing at a nearby cafe. My heart raced at the thought of opening my life a little wider, allowing new friendships to blossom, just like the evening's salutes had ignited camaraderie among us stranger drivers. That night, the potential of connection sparked hope within me, a realization that, perhaps, the salute was not merely a gesture but a beacon guiding me toward a community I hadn't known I craved. I happily fell asleep, dreaming not of electric highways or future innovations, but of the laughter I might soon share with newfound companions, each one fueling the promise of tomorrow's conversations. Update: a week later, I found myself sitting in that very cafe, surrounded by the soft murmur of laughter and conversations just like the ones I'd read about. Each person brought their own story. One had converted their garage into a workshop for DIY electric projects, another was an artist who used solar panels for her studio. As I laughed and shared my own experiences, I realized that each individual's narrative intertwined with mine, forming an unbreakable bond. My Tesla, it turned out, had become more than just a mode of transport. It had become the vessel that carried me toward genuine human connection. I understood now that it wasn't just about the type of car I owned, it was about the paths that unfolded from that ownership, paths leading to friendship, laughter, and the kind of warmth that can only come from moments spent in shared company. The threads we create around us, stitched together by our hopes and shared experiences, are what truly drive us forward, electric or not. And in that bubbling cafe, amid conversations that sparked and flew through the air, I felt anchored and finally at home. As I sat there, nursing my lukewarm coffee and watching the world outside the large windows of the cafe, I couldn't help but be captivated by the sight of families and friends drifting in and out, their laughter mingling with the notes of a gentle piano that seemed to fill the air with warmth. Each car that passed, along with their unique stories and journeys, reminded me of the conversations I had shared online, the kind that made me realize being a Tesla owner was less about the car itself and more about the community it unwittingly introduced me to. Turning my gaze back to the table, I noticed my phone buzz softly, drawing me back into the digital space that had sparked all this. It was a response to my thread. A fellow Tesla owner, Sarah, had shared a particularly poignant story about the emotional journey she underwent after she lost her job. She had taken solace in her daily drives, using her vehicle as a place to contemplate and process her feelings. Inspired by her bravery, I typed back, sharing my own transition from feeling isolated to finding solace in shared experiences, and how the little gatherings had transformed me from a passive commuter to an active participant in my own life. With every keystroke, I could feel the connection strengthening. It was almost palpable, like an electric charge bridging the distance between us. As the cafe lights dimmed, an inviting glow filled the room, and the conversations faded into a soft murmur around me, I suddenly thought of hosting a small gathering of my own. With a tentative excitement swelling within, I imagined a place where the stories of Tesla owners could come together, in the backyard of my own home, perhaps, surrounded by flickering fairy lights and warm fires where we could share not just our car anecdotes but also our lives. I pictured each person arriving, laughter spilling into the night, each tale weaving into a rich tapestry of our collective experiences, the feeling of community blossoming into something beautifully tangible. That evening, I left the cafe with a spark ignited in my heart, an urge to connect, communicate, and transform my newfound realizations into tangible experiences. At home, I jotted down a list of ideas, snacks, drinks, even a few fun games, or perhaps a shared playlist that could have our glowing electric engines humming along in harmony. And as the night carried on, I felt a wave of calm wash over me. The fear of vulnerability I once harbored began to dissolve, leaving behind only the thrilling possibility of what was to come. Fast forward a few weeks, as I prepared my backyard for the first gathering, I marveled at how a simple thread on Reddit had woven this entire experience together. Friends and acquaintances filled my yard, each with stories to share, shedding light on their journeys, from professional triumphs to personal challenges, all the while embracing the very same car that had once made me feel so isolated. Sitting there with a drink in hand, I looked around at familiar faces and new friends, the barriers that once made me hesitant now replaced with an understanding born from the shared experience of our rides. I recognized then that my own initial visions of yearning for admiration or status had faded into deeper connections that fed my soul, friendships that pulsated with the heartbeats of authenticity and trust. As the evening air wrapped around us, filled with the warmth of conversation, laughter, and the scent of grilled food wafting into the night, the realization struck me again. It wasn't just a sleek, silent car in the driveway but a vessel guiding me towards an incredible community of souls. In the laughter shared and stories exchanged, I learned that perhaps the journey we embark on isn't solely about the destination or the vehicle we drive, it's about where we choose to steer our lives, recognizing that the true power lies not in the electric hum of technology, but in the profound connections we cultivate with one another as we traverse this beautiful, chaotic road together. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, I found a serenity in that moment, a newfound understanding of my place in the world, and I smiled softly, eager for the adventures, both on the road and within this remarkable community, that lay ahead. Confession, I had a breakthrough in therapy today, and no one to share it with, which feels both liberating and lonely at the same time. It's hard to explain how I've reached this point in my life, a jumble of emotions and experiences I've kept bottled up for so long. I suppose you could say I'm a bit of a recluse. Most of my friendships faded away in college, not out of malice, but simply because I became so consumed with my thoughts, my anxieties about my future, that I let everyone drift away as I shut myself in. Relying on a steady stream of self-help books and online forums, I found comfort in reaching out to strangers who felt similar, but still, it was never quite enough. Then I found Julia, my therapist, whose calming presence made me feel safe enough to explore the corners of my mind I had buried deeply. It was in her cozy office, with its warm light glowing softly from vintage lamps and the scent of peppermint tea wafting through the air, where I finally confronted my fears head-on. Today, we delved into a nefarious shadow from my past, a moment I had brushed aside for years. I recalled the day my father left, how it felt like the earth had shifted beneath my feet. I had always believed that his departure was simply a matter of his choices, but now, sitting across from Julia, I began to understand the weight it truly carried. I felt a surge of anger rise up in me, not only for him but for myself as well. I hadn't allowed myself to be angry, instead opting for a passive acceptance that rotted away at my soul. As I articulated these feelings, I felt like a burden was lifting. Julia encouraged me to lean into that anger, to give it a voice, and when it finally erupted, the emotional jagged edges smoothed out into tears I didn't know I had left. It was cathartic, and I found myself laughing amidst the tears, a wild mix of emotions rushing through me. I could hardly believe it. Was this what clarity felt like? As the session wrapped up, I felt lighter, liberated even. But leaving her office, a bittersweet emptiness settled in my chest. Who would I tell? My mother, who never really understood how much the divorce had affected me, would likely brush it aside with a wave of her hand and say I should just let it go. My high school friends? They've started families and built careers while I still wrestle with my identity. I felt like a specter in my own life, standing at the periphery of everyone else's bright reality. I walked home, the weight of my revelation lingering in the air, but no one to share it with. The muted hum of the city felt distant and cold, every building towering over me as if they were guardians keeping secrets I longed to uncover. Once inside, I sat on my bed, letting a blanket wrap around me like a cocoon, the world outside fading away. I took out my journal, a paper-bound space where I had chronicled my darker nights and heavier thoughts, and began to write. My pen skimmed across the pages, recounting today's breakthrough. Intricately relaying the details, as if talking to an unseen friend. I wrote about the anger that had bubbled to the surface, the laughter amidst tears, the sheer relief of letting down my guard. It felt both exhilarating and disheartening to not have someone to hear my story, to celebrate this new chapter with me. But in this quiet moment, I embraced the gift of self-reflection. The taut string of vulnerability frayed, and I realized that even in isolation, there's strength in my journey of self-discovery. Maybe I didn't need to rush out and share. Perhaps the most important relationship I needed to nurture was the one with myself. As I turned off the bedside lamp and closed my journal, I felt a flicker of hope, a gentle warmth spreading through me. Maybe tomorrow I'd find the courage to reach out, not just to anyone, but to those who would understand. I drifted off to sleep, embracing the quiet power of my confession, knowing that each step forward, even in solitude, was still a step toward freedom. Update: a week later, I decided to share my experience with a close cousin I hadn't spoken to in ages. Surprisingly, she responded with empathy, recounting her own struggles with unresolved family issues. It opened a door I thought was permanently shut, and for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't alone on this journey. We've started connecting regularly, sharing our stories while learning from each other. Sometimes, even the simplest of breakthroughs can spark a ripple of understanding. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself looking forward to these conversations with my cousin, Jessica. The familiarity of our childhood memories mixed with the weight of our shared struggles created a unique bond, one I hadn't expected to nurture at this stage in my life. Our talks often drifted from nostalgia to deeper subjects, dissecting our family dynamics and the emotional baggage we both carried. I had always viewed my family as this monolithic entity, untouchable and imposing, like an intricate tapestry woven so tightly that any alteration seemed impossible. Jessica's willingness to peel back the layers of her own experiences, however, revealed a shared narrative of feeling trapped beneath the expectations and disappointments that overshadowed our upbringing. One evening, as the sunlight dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I found myself laying everything bare. I spoke of my breakthrough in therapy, the surreal release I felt after confessing my fears and insecurities. I recounted how voicing those once silenced thoughts felt like chipping away at the stone wall I had built around my heart. Jessica listened intently, prompting me with questions that led me deeper into my own psyche while freely sharing her own experiences. Hearing her story about losing her sense of self amidst the chaos of our family's unresolved tension was both heart-wrenching and cathartic. It made me realize just how intertwined our lives were, despite the physical distance and emotional walls we had constructed over the years. Our discussions often transformed into moments of soul-searching. We explored the intricate dance of resentment and love that our parents seemed to project onto us, breaking down our childhoods into poignant memories of both joy and sorrow. I often found myself reflecting on how many bridges I had burned in my search for independence and recognition, bridges that now, through our conversations, felt worthy of mending. Silence would sometimes fall between us, but it was comfortable, almost reassuring, like we were both allowing the weight of our confessions to settle gently. Yet, despite the comfort of renewed connection, I couldn't shake a lingering dread. I had shared pieces of myself with Jessica, but what if my newfound vulnerability revealed too much? What if I evolved and grew beyond the familial ties that had once felt so suffocating? These thoughts gnarled like twisted vines in my mind, and as the anxiety simmered, I realized that my breakthrough was much more profound than I had anticipated. It wasn't merely about me stepping into the light. It was also about redefining the connections I had taken for granted. I hadn't just revealed my truths to Jessica, I was also challenging her to do the same, to reshape our family narrative from one of isolation to one of solidarity. One afternoon, we met for coffee at a quaint little cafe that was a favorite spot of ours when we were kids. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee wrapped around us like a warm embrace. I looked at her, the gentle curve of her smile, the way her eyes sparkled as she spoke passionately about her new perspective on growth, and realization dawned on me, this wasn't merely about confiding in each other, it was about healing together. The fraught histories we carried were not burdens to bear alone but strands of a collective experience that needed to be untangled. That day, we made a pact, one of intention and continued openness. We agreed to delve deeper into our shared histories, promising to approach our next family gatherings not with apprehension but with a newfound strength that stemmed from our conversations. As we left the cafe, I felt buoyed by the sense of community we had resurrected. I understood now that my breakthrough in therapy had unfolded into something larger, something that invited an openness not only within me but in the relationships that mattered. I still had my moments of doubt, but they felt lighter somehow, tempered by the knowledge that I was no longer traversing this journey in isolation. Sometimes, the most profound transformation comes not just from within, but from the bonds we rebuild and the stories we choose to revisit, reframe, and share as we all walk towards our own kind of freedom. As the weeks stretched into months, the dialogue with my cousin deepened in unexpected ways, illuminating the shared shadows we had carried for far too long. Our evening calls became sacred, a ritual of honesty cloaked in laughter and tears. We spoke not just of past hurts but of our aspirations, our fears, and the haunting intricacies of our family dynamics that had once felt too heavy to discuss. I could feel the weight of generations loosening its grip, as if our confessions acted as an unknotted thread, allowing light to filter through the fractures. There was something comforting about hearing her voice, punctuated by moments of understanding that needed no words. We reveled in the joy of knowing we had someone to lean on, a partner in this quest for healing. One evening, as rain tapped gently against my window, I found myself unloading the gravity of my fears about my parents, about the silent expectations they held and the angst that tinged our family gatherings. My cousin listened intently, her silence a soft anchor amidst my turmoil. She confessed her own struggles with the weight of her parents' unresolved conflicts, the way they had often used her as a messenger rather than a daughter, caught in the crossfire of their unspoken grievances. The way she recounted her experience made me feel as though we were two sailors, navigating the unpredictable sea of childhood memories. In those conversations, I learned that vulnerability was a powerful gift we could give each other, a way to weave our distinct threads into a richer tapestry. Sharing our tales became a shared language, a form of healing where we could finally articulate the pain I'd spent so long burying beneath layers of avoidance. Even as I learned to speak my truth aloud, I found there were still threads left unspoken, nuances of our upbringing that lingered just below the surface. One night, fueled by that familiar mixture of comfort and courage, I dared to divulge a childhood memory that I had long locked away. The afternoon I discovered my parents arguing, words like daggers slicing through the air, shattering my innocence. As I recounted it, I felt tears spill, but they were different this time. They felt cleansing, healing, as though each drop rinsed away an old weight. My cousin empathized, sharing a similar moment from her youth, and in those shared truths, we found solace in the realization that we were not alone in our suffering. There was power in our pain, a kinship forged in understanding, and it sparked something new between us. Gradually, as I opened these floodgates of honesty not just with my cousin but with others, I noticed the threads of my life becoming richer, more vibrant, woven together with sincere connections. A few weeks later, emboldened by the sense of community we had constructed, I took the plunge and invited my cousin to a family gathering. The thought had once filled me with dread, inkling memories of discomfort and judgment, but this time felt different. I was no longer standing on the periphery as the fearful child I once was. As the gathering approached, I prepared myself for the tumultuous waters of family dynamics. My cousin arrived, and as we exchanged casual greetings with our relatives, I felt a sense of calmness settle over me. There was a warmth in the sharing of laughter and stories, a feeling of returning home. When those old family tensions emerged, I caught my cousin's eye, and her reassuring nod reminded me that I wasn't alone in the chaos. With each shared glance, we forged our own fortress of solidarity, empowering one another to speak up when old patterns threatened to overshadow this moment of connection. That night, as I lay awake recalling the evening, I realized that my breakthrough had transformed not only my internal world but also the relationships around me. A vibrant sense of empathy blossomed, inviting healing into spaces that had once felt impenetrable. I thought of how simple it had been to reach out, how the act of sharing had sparked an illumination in the dark corners of my heart. Reflecting on it all, I recognized that a real breakthrough isn't just a moment of personal revelation, it's an invitation to cultivate deeper connections, embracing the profound simplicity of shared honesty. My cousin and I had not only found a bridge over our individual struggles, but we had also rekindled the flame of familial love, showing that sometimes, the path to freedom is illuminated by the stories we dare to share. As I closed my eyes, I felt a profound sense of gratitude envelop me, knowing that those shared tales of vulnerability were not just acts of bravery, they were the beacons guiding us toward healing and connection. And for that, I knew I would always cherish my journey, no matter how winding it may be. When the news rolled in about the upcoming 2024 general election, I felt something shifting within me, an unfamiliar sensation bubbling up that wrestled for dominance, an unsettling mix of anxiety and detachment that I couldn't quite place. My name is Alex, a 33-year-old graphic designer living in a small town in Ohio, where politics always seemed to be the gossip just shy of being casual dinner conversation. I had always practiced my democratic right with diligence, feeling the pull to make my voice heard, but this year, as I sifted through the barrage of political ads and polarizing debates, the thought of participating began to feel like an undertaking I was no longer prepared to shoulder. My friends, a close-knit group that loved long discussions over cheap beer in dimly lit corners of our favorite pub, were animated about their plans to vote, each of them ready to champion their chosen candidate with fervor. I sat quietly, an observer in a room full of political fervor, my heart heavy with an unspoken truth. I had made the decision to abstain. In the weeks leading up to the election, I found myself grappling with the consequences of my choice, wrestling with guilt. The fear of being judged loomed over me like a dark cloud, especially when Marissa, one of my closest friends, looked me in the eye and asked point-blank why I wasn't getting involved. Her passion was palpable, a stark contrast to my silent disillusionment. I had always prided myself on being the progressive voice in our group, often debating to the wee hours about the state of the nation, but at that moment, I felt a chasm forming between who I was and who I was expected to be. As the October sky turned gray, the chatter about the election only intensified. All around me, people began sharing their reasons to be hopeful, while I remained bound within my cocoon of reluctance and ambivalence. On election day, I made my way to the polling station as if pulled by an invisible force, my heart racing with indecision. But as I stood in line, watching the excitement cascade off my neighbors, their hopeful faces illuminated by the promise of change, I couldn't help but feel that my choice had carved out a hollow space in my chest. I turned away from the polling booth. I didn't cast my vote, and the relief that washed over me felt like a strange, slippery comfort, reminding me of the countless times I had ignored what I really wanted. Days passed, turning into weeks, and I rejoined my friends, feigning enthusiasm about the election results while internally grappling with an overwhelming sense of being an outsider. But with every social gathering, the question beckoned: how would I reconcile my decision? My internal turmoil simmered, and I slipped into a routine that felt numbingly safe. Over beers one night, Marissa caught me staring off into space, her brow furrowing with concern. "Don't you care where this country is headed?" she asked, half jesting but genuinely curious. The truth was, I did care, but it was the decision-making process that had weighed on me like an anchor. I finally took a breath, confessing that while I had chosen abstention, I was scared of both the consequences and the implications of my choice, a choice that was fundamentally my own. The bar quieted, the noise of surrounding conversations faded as unexpected empathy settled among us. "You know, it still counts that you thought it through, right?" Marissa said softly. "Taking a stand is more than just voting." Those words resonated deeper than I anticipated, stirring something lost within me. A sense of relief washed over me like a warm wave, and I suddenly found clarity amid the chaos. As I walked away from the pub that night, thinking of the natural ebb and flow of democracy, I realized my decision didn't have to define me. It echoed back to the importance of understanding my values, and the courage to live with my choices, even those that differ from others. A few weeks later, I returned to the forum that sparked this exploration, drawn by a post titled "Voting Eligible Americans Who Deliberately Abstained in the 2024 General Election. How are you feeling about your decision?" My fingers hovered above the keyboard as I began to type, feeling surprisingly cathartic. "I didn't vote, and I had to confront something within myself that needed attention," I wrote, detailing my feelings of isolation, the conversations I had with friends, and the beauty of owning my narrative, free from the chains of expectation. The replies came flooding in, each comment filled with support and encouragement, a sign that I wasn't alone in my experience. As the reflections flowed, I understood that sometimes the silence was louder, and in the stillness of my decision, I found my voice, a piece of me I thought I'd lost amid the tumultuous noise of others. Even if I hadn't marched to the ballot box, I had started a new conversation within myself, a dialogue that brought me peace and a sense of reconnection with those around me. In the back of my mind, I felt the tide beginning to turn, waiting for the next election, where I would be ready, not just to vote, but to connect, to engage in the very democracy I feared for so long. And that felt, in so many ways, like a victory. The days turned into weeks, and as the leaves turned their brilliant colors of fall, I found myself in a reflective state more often than not. I could feel that familiar blend of anxiety and relief slipping away simultaneously. It astonished me how something as simple as acknowledging my own feelings about participation could liberate my mind. I had been caught in a cycle of feeling pressured to engage in a political landscape I found overwhelming. Watching the news had become akin to walking through a foggy forest, the shadows of tensions looming everywhere, but clarity eluded me. I decided it was time to share my realizations, and I did so with friends over warm coffees and cozy dinners, often nestled in our favorite cafe, the one adorned with local art and the warmth of community. It sparked conversations that felt refreshing, the kind I hadn't experienced in ages, where we discussed not only the frustrations of the political process but also our own experiences and insecurities surrounding it. Through these candid exchanges, I realized I was not alone. Others had their own hesitations, some had chosen to abstain not out of apathy but due to a lack of transparency in a system that felt rigged. It was refreshing to uncover these truths, and my heart swelled with an emerging sense of solidarity. I began to take part in community debates and local gatherings, often simply to listen, absorbing perspectives that broadened my understanding of the issues plaguing us. Each conversation, each shared laugh or sigh of frustration, chipped away at the barricade that I had built around myself over the years. You see, I was always the quiet one, the thinker who mulled over every word before they left my lips. As a child, I'd be lost in my books while the world outside thrummed with the energy of life, utterly consuming yet seemingly foreign. But now, I discovered that the threads of connection we forged could be powerful tools for change. On a chilly November night, as the first snowflakes felt like whispers on my cheeks, I found myself in a small community center, seated in a circle of open hearts and eager minds. We were there to discuss the issues we faced and how we could foster a more transparent dialogue in the political realm. I spoke, not with fear but with intent, sharing my journey of abstaining from voting. When I finished, I was met with nods and insightful questions that encouraged deeper reflections. I felt the comforting warmth of acceptance wash over me. It turned out authenticity was the key, allowing everyone to relax their guard, igniting a fire to participate. Each of us had varying experiences with the electoral process, and as we spoke, I noticed a shift. Our frustrations morphed into ideas, ideas sparked plans, and plans became action. By the time Christmas rolled around, the spirit of togetherness was palpable, and we were organizing small initiatives to educate our community about local governance, breaking down barriers that often made participation feel insurmountable. The more we spoke, the more I realized that my decision to abstain was only a moment in a larger narrative, one that now included countless voices all demanding to be heard. Amid the glow of holiday lights, I felt a profound sense of duty begin to bloom alongside my old fears. I could finally see the beauty in civic engagement. Ours was a collective journey, one shaped by our joys and our struggles. I even found myself having conversations with family, my parents included, who always assumed my quiet nature translated to passivity. They listened, surprised to hear me share my newfound passion, the convictions bubbling up like a fresh spring. We agreed the political system was far from perfect, yet we recognized together the power we wielded in our communities. As 2024 approached, rather than feeling burdened by decision fatigue, I felt empowered by possibilities. I continued to stay informed, setting aside my cynicism and instead rooting for change rooted in compassion and understanding. Each small gathering, every collective decision we made, ignited a spark in me. I felt hopeful in a way I hadn't in many years, ready to march not just into the next election but into every conversation that needed to happen, ready for any certainty and uncertainty that may unfold. And so, as I look back upon those fleeting moments, I carry not just the weight of my previous decisions but the understanding that each vote matters, and each voice, mine included, deserves to be heard loud and clear. And who knows? Perhaps when the next election rolls around, I won't just find my voice, I'll help others find theirs, as our stories intertwine in this complex tapestry of democracy that we are all learning to navigate together. As the days turned to weeks after that pivotal moment of realization, I found myself reflecting on the conversations I'd had with friends and family who, like me, had waded through their own complexities regarding the political landscape. Each gathering, whether it was over coffee in the early morning light or during lazy evenings watching the sun dip below the horizon, became a safe haven where we could peel back the layers of our doubts and fears. Collaboratively, we explored the weight of our choices, the regrets and hopes that clung to the shadows of our decisions as much as they did to the bright moments of clarity we unexpectedly stumbled upon. I remember one specific evening in early December, when a heavy snowfall blanketed the world outside, casting a quiet that settled into our hearts. We nestled together in my living room, curled up with blankets, hot chocolate warming our fingers, the soft glow of candlelight flickering in the corners. It was here that we spoke openly about the nuances of political abstention and choice, as real faces and names flashed through our minds, struggles and joys intertwined. Why didn't we just vote? My friend Sarah asked, crunching her marshmallow-laden treat between her teeth, her eyes wide and searching. I could feel the weight of her gaze. We had all pondered that question at some point, and as the air filled with warmth and a hint of vulnerability, I decided to share. Because I was scared, I finally admitted, my voice gentle yet firm, scared that whatever I chose could cause more harm than good, that my one little voice wouldn't matter in the cacophony of noise. Slowly, the others began to share. It was as if each unraveling thread brought us closer together. We each found safety in the collective breath of shared uncertainty, our voices merging into a symphony of reassurances, echoing the notion that we could all relate, a tapestry of human experience meeting. at the heart of our insecurities. But now, I continued, emboldened by our exchange, I realize that even silence is a choice that echoes through the halls of democracy. I'm more determined than ever to navigate this journey, not just for me, but for everyone who feels unheard. I could see the spark resonate as it ignited within my friends, and that feeling lingered, illuminating our discussions over the following weeks. As the holiday season brought us together again and again, those conversations helped dissipate the clouds of doubt that hung over our heads, slowly transforming into beams of anticipation for what lay ahead. Each time we met, I felt more assured, more equipped to engage not just in political debates but in the human element of our experiences. We shared stories beyond the confines of voting, ones that traversed familial struggles, economic uncertainties, and the broader, aging questions about morality and justice. When January rolled in, I found myself feverishly reading about local candidates and nurturing a curiosity about issues that had once felt foreign to me. It became increasingly clear that I didn't merely want to educate myself, I yearned to empower those around me to feel that same thrill, the kind of passion that ignited a fire in our hearts. We organized small, casual meetups to discuss what mattered to us, drafting a loose plan to engage with others in our communities, and I could see the excitement ripple through our group. The days brightened, not just because spring was thawing winter's edge but because I felt the stirrings of a movement blossom among friends, neighbors, and a dawning belief that were we to come together with empathy and purpose, we could all carve out a space in this intricate system of governance that so often felt distant. It was a tangled web, yes, but one I was now eager to explore, step by step. As the chatter of the upcoming primary elections flickered on the horizon, I knew I would not be tiptoeing into my first vote alone. That commitment to re-engage came with promises layered in love for my community and the unyielding desire to be a part of something larger than myself. No longer would I hide behind the veil of silence, waiting to be swept away, for now my voice was a thread woven into the ongoing conversation, rippling outward to others waiting to share their stories too. With each heartfelt discussion, I felt more assured that we each had power, not just in the voting booth but in our stories, our connections, and the courage to face uncertainty together. And who knows? Perhaps the next time I stood in line at the polling place, I wouldn't just be looking for my own voice but ready to encourage my fellow citizens to find and raise theirs, fusing our energy in a chorus of hope, and stepping into a future we could all believe in. As I settled into bed that night, enveloped by the gentle hum of life around me, I let myself drift, comforted by the knowledge that, regardless of the election's outcome, a new chapter had begun, not just for me, but for all of us navigating this shared journey. It was a humid summer evening, the kind that clung to your skin with its heat and filled the air with a sense of restless energy that made everything feel a little more alive. My friends and I had gathered in Aaron's dimly lit basement, the kind of place we felt safe in, safely tucked away from the world, where secrets and laughter echoed off the concrete walls. We were all entering our junior year of high school, and for the first time since middle school, we felt grown up enough for a night of truth or dare, with all the bravado and mischief that seemed to come with it. The atmosphere was electric, fueled by the dim glow of fairy lights strung across the ceiling and the hum of our excitement. I sat cross-legged on the worn-out carpet with Liz and Tyler to my right and Tim on my left, my heart racing, caught up in the thrill of the night, uncertainty bubbling to the surface with each round. The dares began innocently enough. Tim had to text his crush a cringe-worthy pickup line, while Liz found herself balancing a spoon on her nose. But as the night wore on and the drinks flowed a little too freely, the dares escalated. That's when Ariel, the often quiet but fiercely intelligent girl who usually sat on the fringes of our group, surprised us all with her growing confidence. She challenged Aaron, who was always the jokester, to kiss the girl he found the least attractive in the room. Everyone can vouch for how ridiculous that was. We all knew his longtime crush was Katie, who wasn't even here. But instead of backing down, Aaron shot a mischievous grin and declared he'd do it. With barely a moment's hesitation, he leaned in and planted a quick kiss on my cheek. The room fell silent, and it felt like the air had been sucked out of us. I could feel my face flush, a mix of shock and something else fluttering in my stomach, and I froze. They all erupted in laughter, but my laughter was hollow, a shell around a growing anxiety that twisted in my gut. I didn't expect the heat of embarrassment to turn into something deeply unsettling as he casually brushed it off and returned to his place among the crowd. A wave of unease rolled through me as the night continued, my friends cycling through more ridiculous dares while I sat fidgeting, trying to shake off the warmth that still lingered on my skin. My mind raced, caught in this internal war. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as a prank while another part was helplessly fascinated by the fleeting intimacy of the moment. That's when Ariel turned to me, visibly picking up on my discomfort. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked softly, her brows knitted with concern. It was a simple question, yet loaded with meaning in a room where honesty was a fleeting currency. I shrugged, forcing a smile, but something in her gaze compelled me to admit more. I didn't expect that. It felt. I don't know. I trailed off, desperately searching for the right words to express how a seemingly innocent dare had spiraled into a tangled web of emotions. Ariel nodded, and I could see she understood in a way I didn't expect. The night wore on, but my mind lingered on that moment. The game fizzled out as people grew weary, and eventually, we found ourselves sprawled on the basement floor, half-heartedly engaged in conversation. As the clock ticked toward midnight, I gathered enough courage to voice my discomfort to the group, hoping to lighten the tension that sat heavily in the air. I mentioned how that dare had stirred up feelings I didn't quite know how to handle, and as I spoke, I saw relief wash over Ariel's face. She must have sensed my need for validation, and when I finished rambling, she was quick to back me up, sharing her own feelings of discomfort over Aaron's boldness. Surprisingly, that shared experience opened a door between us. The others leaned in, listening intently. The laughter that previously filled the room morphed into a collective rumble of understanding, as everyone began to admit to their own moments of awkwardness during the game. I could see Aaron's smile falter, and for the first time that night, I witnessed genuine recognition of his thoughtlessness. Maybe it was the alcohol or just the moment, but feelings of camaraderie flooded our conversation, wrapping us all in its embrace. Some truths were spoken, some dares forgotten, but we connected that night on a deeper level than I ever anticipated. As we left Aaron's house, the night air was cool against my flushed cheeks, and the laughter echoed in my mind, a reminder that even in discomfort, there is a chance for clarity and understanding. Reflecting on it all, I realized that sometimes it takes a moment of absurdity to bring a group a little closer, to allow vulnerability to glitter beneath the surface. A few weeks later, when I saw Ariel again in English class, I noted a wave of reassurance as we exchanged knowing smiles, a small reminder of how that one chaotic game had shifted something within our circle. It had made me think about friendship and honesty in a new light. As I drifted to sleep that night, my heart felt lighter, knowing I wasn't alone in navigating these strange, growing feelings of adolescence. Ariel and I had forged an unlikely bond over a silly dare that taught us both something profound about ourselves and each other. It wasn't just another game, it was a pivotal moment in our lives that bridged into deeper connections and understanding. Anyone bold enough to kiss beneath the veil of a simple dare unknowingly opens the door to vast exploration of emotions, and sometimes that's all it takes for true friendship to flourish. Days passed, and the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting an orange glow across the quiet suburban streets that felt both comforting and foreign at the same time. The laughter from our last game of truth or dare echoed in my mind like a favorite song, but it wasn't just the thrill of the game that lingered, it was the sensation of Ariel's lips brushing against mine, a fleeting moment that had somehow changed everything. I found myself looking forward to school again, not for the classes, but for the moments shared between us. It was in the cafeteria where Ariel and I sat together every day after that. Her laughter rang clear and bright, almost as if it had a life of its own. We talked about everything, our favorite books, the pressure of grades, and the silly crushes we had. But beneath the surface, a subtle shift was happening. The air seemed charged with anticipation, with unspoken words hanging heavily between us. During a particularly playful lunch, Ariel dared me to serenade her in front of our friends, and before I could think, I stood up, clearing my throat. With a mix of embarrassment and excitement, I improvised a silly love song that drew giggles from the group, but as I looked into her eyes, my heart raced, not just from the dares themselves but from how deeply I was beginning to care for her. That day, as we walked home, I couldn't shake the feeling that what had started as a game was growing into something wonderful, something complicated. Yet, with every shared laugh and every moment spent in her warm presence, doubts crept in. What if I misread the signals? What if, in trying to pursue this uncharted territory, I put our friendship at risk? Perhaps I should keep my feelings buried deep like one of those secrets you whisper into the softest corners of your mind. The turning point arrived on a Friday evening when a group of us gathered for another round of truth or dare. This time, it was different. There was an undercurrent of tension as whispers and teasing glances circulated. I found myself caught between wanting to participate and wanting to protect what I had with Ariel. When it was my turn, I took a breath, eyes darting toward Ariel's reassuring smile, and I chose dare, hoping it might push the boundaries of our friendship just a little further. I dare you to call your biggest crush and confess your feelings. A friend blurted out, and the air thickened instantly. My heart sank, the dare echoed in my mind, reshaping my thoughts into a whirlpool of panic. My biggest crush was right in front of me, sitting just inches away, yet the idea of saying it aloud paralyzed me. Glancing at Ariel, my throat tightened. The group urged me on, the pressure swelling in my chest. I didn't want to make a fool of myself or ruin what we had, but what if this was an opportunity to clarify everything? With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone, dialing without giving it one more thought. I could hear the ringing in my ears as Ariel shot me a questioning look, her eyes a mixture of support and confusion. Finally, a voice answered, fuzzy through my nerves. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my tone light, but all I could think about was Ariel's expectant gaze. I stumbled through the first few lines, but then as we reached an awkward silence, something shifted inside me. "Actually," I said, "you know what? I think I just made a mistake. Because there's someone I really like, and I think I should tell her. So, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do it." I hung up, adrenaline pumping through my veins, and before I could collect myself, I turned to Ariel, whose mouth hung open in shock. I meant you," I blurted, the words tumbling out faster than I could catch them. The room went quiet, and finally, the silence broke, my friends stifling giggles while maintaining their conspiratorial whispers. Ariel's cheeks flushed a deep crimson, but her expression softened, confusion melting into understanding. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribcage, the weight of the moment pressing down on my shoulders. Time froze as we locked eyes, and suddenly it felt as if the walls around us had melted away, leaving just the two of us suspended in a cosmic bubble of anticipation. "Really?" she whispered, almost as if she were afraid to shatter the fragile canvas of this new reality. For a moment, I considered retreating, to erase my impulsive confession before it could lead to something bad, but instead, I found courage stirring within me. "Yeah, really," I replied, allowing my vulnerability to bridge the defining gap between us, where friendship and something deeper could meet. The air shifted, her nervous smile turned into a beaming one, and suddenly, the tension that had borne itself in that moment began to dissolve. We both laughed, the kind of laugh that radiates warmth, locking away uncertainty and cultivating a newfound depth to our relationship. That evening didn't end in a single dare, it spiraled into a torrent of honest conversations, dreams shared beneath the stars, and the unguarded joy of finally discovering connection. It changed the way we saw each other, not as just friends daring each other, but as two people brave enough to step beyond conventional boundaries, daring to embrace what lay ahead. In the weeks that followed, we navigated the delicate and uncharted territory of being more than friends, connecting not only through playful dares but genuine vulnerability in our interactions. Every stolen glance and nervous touch sent shivers through me, and gradually, the boundary that once defined our friendship melted away into something exquisite and gleaming. Ariel and I became partners in more than just games, we became partners in exploring the intricacies of young love, challenging ourselves to embrace what it meant to uncover intimacy while carrying the sweetness of youth on our shoulders. As the days turned into weeks, I realized that we had ventured beyond those initial trembling steps into a world rich with laughter, support, and understanding, teaching us both that every friendship has the potential to grow and evolve in the most unexpected ways, as long as we have the courage to dare. In retrospect, that game of truth or dare hadn't merely been a game, it became a transformative catalyst for our lives, pushing the edges of our hearts until they opened wide, inviting in the warmth of trust and affection. And just like that, we were no longer just players in a game, but co-authors of a tender story that was only just beginning. The weeks that followed that fateful night were nothing short of a whirlwind. The gravity of our dare had subtly shifted the dynamics of our group, and what was once a carefree circle of friends blossomed into something deeper and more intricate. Every Friday, we gathered at the old tree in my backyard, now a sanctuary of laughter and secrets. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting golden hues that danced through the branches, making the world feel like a secret haven. I could feel the change in the air, as conversations faded into soft smiles and longing glances exchanged between Ariel and me. It wasn't overt, but rather an unspoken agreement that lingered just beneath the surface. My heart was a patched quilt of excitement and anxiety as I started to wonder what it meant for us to redefine our friendship, to cross the boundaries laid out by childish innocence. One evening, with soft twilight surrounding us, Ariel dared me to share a secret, her tone playful but her eyes searching. My thoughts raced. It would have been easy to share something inconsequential, a quirky habit or an embarrassing moment, but the worry still lodged in my throat that our friendship would change irrevocably made me hesitate. Was I ready to lay my heart bare? Finally, I decided on the secret I had kept tucked away. I confessed how that kiss had shifted something inside me. The confession sprung forth timidly, as if it were a small bird breaking free from a cage. Ariel blinked slowly, absorbing my words, and a tender silence wrapped around us like a warm blanket. I held my breath, waiting for her response. After what felt like an eternity, her smile broke into the kind of radiance that filled the space between us with warmth. "I feel the same way," she replied, her voice a soft whisper caught in the evening breeze. Those simple words transformed the air around us, filling it with a sweet heaviness. A mix of relief and exhilaration engulfed me, and suddenly, the tremors of my previous doubts seemed trivial against the vastness of our connection. We moved closer, our shoulders brushing, creating a spark that ignited behind my ribs. The laughter of our friends in the distance faded, giving way to a cocoon of intimacy that felt both thrilling and terrifying. That night marked a pivot in our friendship. We began to confide in each other more, sharing dreams and fears over quiet conversations beneath the stars. In those moments of vulnerability, I discovered layers of Ariel I had never known, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about her dreams of being a photographer, how she wrestled with self-doubt, and how she found solace in nature's quiet embrace. Life was starting to unveil its complexities, each layer revealing deeper shades of understanding and admiration. However, with the beauty of blossoming feelings also came complications. As the pressure of our new dynamic settled in, I worried with each passing day, what if this bond, so fragile and precious, fractured under the weight of expectations? I watched as our friends, including Jake and Lily, began to notice the subtle shift, their taunts and playful nudges serving as jarring reminders of our transformation. Each time they jokingly nudged us together, claiming we were dating, a prickle of anxiety shot through me. Were we ready for that? One Friday evening, our group took a spontaneous trip to a local carnival, filled with laughter and tangled threads of joy. The air was saturated with the aroma of cotton candy and popcorn, a nostalgic scent I could hardly resist. As we walked through the throngs of people, my heart raced not just from the excitement of the carnival atmosphere but from the undeniable tension bubbling under the surface between Ariel and me. That night, the game we played took on a life of its own. It was no longer about childish dares but about truths we were unprepared to face amidst the laughter. After riding the Ferris wheel, we ended up in a quiet corner away from the jubilant crowd, and Luna, ever the instigator, suggested a game of truth or dare. I could sense the exhilaration dancing in the group as if everyone was holding their breath, unsure of what was to come. When it was my turn, I chose truth, contemplating whether to confront my emotions or cloak them in the comfort of playfulness. I could feel Ariel's gaze on me, searching, as if she, too, were taking stock of what was happening. "Do you have feelings for anyone in this group?" Jake asked, his eyes darting mischievously between us, igniting the familiar tension swirling around our little gang. Time seemed to stretch like taffy, and all the air left my chest. Struggling to breathe, I glanced at Ariel. The secret of our burgeoning feelings loomed over us like a dark cloud, and my heart raced at the thought of confessing what lay hidden beneath the surface. Looking into her eyes, I felt a sudden surge of courage. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady as I held her gaze. "I do." Ariel's breath caught, her eyes widening with surprise tinted with familiarity. The room buzzed with excitement and intrigue, yet it was as if the world around us faded into the background. "And who might that be?" Tara pressed eagerly. "I can't believe it's not me," she joked, but her laughter felt distant. "The truth is," I said, allowing the honesty of the moment to unfurl, "it's Ariel." The shock that settled in the air rippled through the circle, gasps escaping lips and laughter slightly fading as the weight of my confession danced across the charged atmosphere. Ariel's cheeks flushed a delicate shade of pink, and she searched my face for any sign of jest but instead found sincerity gleaming in my gaze. There, in the thick fog of uncertainty, our bond felt palpable, stepping from the shadows into a vibrant light, much like the emerging dawn. To my surprise, Ariel didn't shy away. Instead, she grinned, laughter bubbling up as if a wall of tension had dissolved between us. "I guess we're both in trouble then," she said, her smile wide, plunging us both into a newfound exhilaration that wove its way through our friends. As the last remnants of summer spilled into our lives, we navigated this fresh landscape of connection, our hearts dancing in harmony as we balanced between the playful thrill of the dare and the profound truth of our feelings. The carnival faded into memory, replaced by sleepy afternoons and quiet evenings wrapped in warmth, where we dared to venture further into each other's lives, sharing moments of sweetness, uncertainty, and a sprinkle of inevitable doubt. Months went by, a tender rhythm established beneath the guise of friendship, but as with any journey through uncharted territory, complications began to arise. I've learned that emotions aren't always kind, they can twist into something complicated, gnawing at confidence. We still played our games, but each dare felt heavy with expectation, our flirting becoming a tender dance on seemingly fragile ground. The fear of losing what we had made me hesitant, challenging me to balance what we wanted against the foundation we built. Then came an evening when I couldn't put it off any longer. Ariel and I found ourselves finally alone on the old tree swing, swaying slightly, reflecting on the shared laughter of the past few months. I turned to her, breathless. "What are we doing?" My voice broke softly against the stillness, and she met my gaze with an expression shimmering with understanding. "We're daring ourselves to be vulnerable," Ariel replied, her voice steady yet soft. We talked deep into the night, the stars shimmering above us, and it occurred to me, what began as simply a dare had evolved into something courageous and necessary. We had traversed the tender intricacies of friendship and intimacy, learning to embrace the duality of being both creators and caretakers of our story. In that moment, I wasn't afraid anymore. I wanted the story to continue, with all its complications and beauty, an intricate tapestry woven from our laughter, caution, and daring love. It was neither a clear-cut beginning nor a resolute ending, it was simply the unfolding of what we had dared to explore. Friendship matters, especially when it fosters love, and as dawn broke on the horizon that night, I felt an invigorating rush of certainty. Whatever came next, we would face it together, hand in hand, open to the wild and wonderful journey that lay ahead. And so, as I laid my head down that night, a smile lingered on my lips, breathing warmth into my dreams, knowing whatever shadows danced at the edges of our story would only serve to deepen the bond we had forged, the bond seated in a silly dare that had blossomed into a beautiful connection, as real and tender as we dared to believe it could be. I never thought a simple request could age me a decade overnight, but that's precisely what happened during that fated spring break trip last year. It was meant to be a promise of fun and relaxation, a chance to distance myself from the unrelenting grind of college life and the constant pressure to excel. I was just 21, teetering on the precarious edge of adulthood, enjoying the carefree days of dorm life with my closest friend, Alan. He was the type of guy who could make anyone laugh, his infectious energy always lighting up the room. Together, we decided to head to a beach house owned by his family, knowing full well that the rest of our friends would join in the chaos. The first few days were blissful, sun-kissed skin, laughter echoing against the waves, and late-night bonfires where we told stories that blurred the lines between truth and embellishment. Yet, things took a turn when one evening, while we were sprawled across the sand, Alan slipped me a drink, a potent mix of whatever liquor he'd scavenged from the others. He smirked, raised his glass, and with a teasing tone, asked, "What's the wildest thing you've ever done?" That question hung in the air like a thundercloud, nudging at my insecurities. I had spent years cultivating an image of responsibility, of being the sensible one, while Alan was the party starter. Tempted by the thrill of vulnerability in that moment, I regaled them with an old story from high school, about how I once dared to sneak into a neighbor's pool under the cover of darkness. Laughter erupted, encouraging me, pushing me to divulge more. But it wasn't long before Alan challenged me again, pushing the limits further. "You wouldn't jump off the pier, would you?" He grinned, and the eyes of our friends lit up with a mix of excitement and disbelief. The old me would have steered clear of such recklessness, but a strange blend of courage and foolishness swept over me, igniting a fierce desire to break free from my self-imposed shackles. With a nod, I found myself racing toward the edge of the dock, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could hear my friends cheering behind me, urging me on, and before I knew it, I leapt into the crystalline depths below. The rush was exhilarating, a heady concoction of laughter, shouts, and splashes, momentarily washing away my worries. But as I resurfaced, gasping for air, joy transformed into horror as I glanced back toward the pier. Seconds later, I watched as Alan's expression changed from delight to shock. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed someone struggling against the cold waves. In an instant, I transformed from the reckless adventurer into a lifeguard, instinct guiding my actions as I propelled through the water to reach them. I could hear the panic in their shouts, muffled by the roar of the sea, but I reached the girl just in time. Her eyes were wide with fear as I wrapped my arm around her, kicking hard against the tide, but despite my efforts, we both struggled in the frigid waters. Eventually, I managed to pull her back up to the wooden dock, panting and shivering, but all I could think about was the tide of realizations crashing over me. I had not been the brave hero, I was just a scared kid from that moment on, preferring to cling to safety even more viciously than before. The girl, it turned out, was fine, just shaken. Her grateful smile was the sole light in the rising storm of my thoughts. But that night, my recklessness morphed into something darker, deeper, as I reflected on the fine line that separates youthful adventure from genuine danger. In the days that followed, the initial thrill of spring break was replaced with a creeping sense of responsibility that shadowed me relentlessly. I found myself analyzing every risk, every decision, questioning who I was beyond the facade of carefree college life. I used to see life as a series of leaps into excitement, but now, I felt the weight of consequences heavily upon my shoulders. My peers resumed their laughter and beach games like nothing happened, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that I'd lost a piece of myself that day. As the sun began to set on our final night at the beach, everyone gathered for one last bonfire as the flames flickered like my restless thoughts. I sat quietly, observing my friends' jubilant revelry from the periphery, acutely aware of the stark contrast between their joy and my rising anxiety. I couldn't help but think I had aged more than just a few years in that moment, a concept that kept reverberating through my mind like a haunting echo. I felt the invisible scars deepen, accepting that growing up meant grappling with heavier choices and bearing the weight of the world with every decision I made from then on. But that's when Alan nudged me, pulling me to join in the spontaneous late-night dance party that had broken out, lifting the weight of the world just barely off my shoulders. In that shared moment, as music flowed through the air, I began to realize that this perverse cycle of responsibility and recklessness could coexist. Yet, the laughter felt different, more bittersweet than before, tinged with the reminder of what could have been. Months later, I still ponder how that trip aged me in ways I hadn't anticipated but subtly come to accept that it was all part of my evolving story. I learned to embrace the lessons learned through moments of fear and joy alike, balancing life's risks with the warm glow of memories shared with friends. And while I may have accelerated into adulthood that spring, I also forged deeper connections, finally realizing that each moment, laden with meaning, is the true essence of growing up, one beautiful, terrifying leap at a time. And now, as I sit in my dimly lit room, reflecting on that chaotic trip, I know I'm not the same person I was before that pier. You always carry a piece of it with you, don't you? The wildness of youth combined with the wisdom gained from necessity, teaching you to dance through life's invitations and the whispers of its dangers all the same. Update: just this past weekend, I found myself at a gathering, one of many new adventures that have formed since that exhilarating flash of recklessness. Alan was there, of course, making jokes and riling everyone up, and amid the merriment, he pulled me aside to reminisce. Remember that pier jump? You were the hero of the hour, he laughed lightly. I chuckled but replied, yeah, but it aged me too, you know? He looked thoughtful for a moment before grinning, maybe a year or two, but you've grown. You're stronger, he said, clasping my shoulder. And I realized then that he was right. Sometimes, the moments that seem to age us the quickest can be the very ones that define us for years to come. As we returned to the lively kitchen filled with the aroma of homemade pasta and the sound of laughter, I couldn't shake off that moment with Alan. It was strange how a simple conversation could unravel a deeper thread in the fabric of my life. I felt an echo of nostalgia buried beneath layers of worry and responsibility. I watched as my friends swirled around in their carefree dance of adulthood, the kind we often take for granted until time itself shows its teeth. The years were marching on, yet here we were, caught in a time bubble, the weight of our shared memories lightening the burdens of our separate lives. With every toast and cheer, my mind flickered back to my own personal strife, balancing the chaos of work and family, dreams deferred, and aspirations left half-spoken. What had once felt like vibrant ambitions now felt like aging echoes of my former self. I found solace in the comforting warmth of companionship, but there was a tinge of melancholy that hung around like an uninvited guest. As the night deepened, Alan gathered us for a game that was meant for bonding but, as I soon discovered, it unraveled deeper fissures. He proposed a round of truth or dare, a harmless nostalgia trip that began with giggles and light teasing. But as it circled around, the dares shifted from fun challenges to deeper revelations, pulling secrets and insecurities from the shadows. I found myself holding my breath waiting for the inevitable moment when someone would push too far, and my stomach knotted at the thought of what might be unearthed. When it came my turn, I chose truth, and Alan, with that mischievous twinkle in his eye, asked, "What's something you've done that you wish you could take back?" I could feel the pulse of the room stutter in anticipation, my heart thundering against my ribcage. What came to mind wasn't one single action but an amalgamation of tiny moments, the sting of envy when a friend succeeded, the harsh words hurled during an argument with my partner, the silent nights that slipped by under the weight of unspoken feelings. Instead of sharing those, I found myself morphed by instinct into a version of me that swaddled vulnerability and masked it with humor. I'd take back that day I thought it would be funny to throw a cherry bomb in the school bathroom. I chuckled, the laughter hollow in my throat, and for a moment, shared laughter filled the gap where discomfort dwelled. But that laughter soon faded as the dares grew more daring, revealing true fears and regrets. It became clear that we all bore the marks of our experiences, some more than others. When it was Alan's turn again, he smirked and said, "Okay, dare me to sing a song." But something in the way he played with his drink gave it all away. The smile never quite reached his eyes. Perhaps in that moment, everyone realized, for all the laughter and bravado, we were suspended in the perils of adulthood that seemed to sap away the essence of carefree youth. As the reality of our fragile unmasking settled over us, I found myself more aware than ever of how quickly years can slip by and change us. The carefree evenings of our youth were now sprinkled with the stardust of nostalgia but marred by the gravity of regret and responsibility. Later that night, as I whispered goodnight to my friends and climbed into bed, I couldn't escape the haunting truth that came with the joy of reunion: nothing stays the same, and clinging to the past sometimes only amplifies the ache of becoming. I closed my eyes, listening to the distant echoes of laughter drifting from the party still happening down the hall, and contemplated how every trial we endured, every choice that stung, contributed to the elevation of our lives, whether we liked it or not. In the insistent quiet of the night, I understood that these seemingly aging moments, both burdens and blessings, were the very threads that stitched our stories together. I saw the glimmer of hope in change, in growth, as I came to the realization that defining those moments from the past would not just contour my existence but also establish the path for journeys yet to come. As I drifted into sleep, my mind wandered to the idea of seeking out each experience, embracing even the pain, like sculptors shaping their creations, understanding that just as love and laughter could nourish, fears and regrets could forge resilience. Life doesn't just age us, it crafts us, one unassuming night at a time. Update: a week later, after our reunion, I received a message from Alan, asking if we could meet up. Skeptical at first, I agreed, intrigued. We met at the park where we used to hang out as kids, and as we walked, he admitted that he had been struggling with his own demons, an unexpected job loss and feeling inadequate. I could see the toll it had taken on him, and somewhere within me, I realized that though life might age us, it could also connect us in newfound ways. Through that honest exchange, we made a pact to not only be there for each other but to face life's hurdles together, renewing our friendship after years of drifting apart. In that moment, it was clear, the journeys that once seemed daunting were now avenues for growth. Together we could battle the inevitability of aging, one small victory at a time. The rest of the evening unfolded like a dream, the soft golden hue of the setting sun spilling through the trees as it cast playful shadows on the grass. I felt an unexpected surge of gratitude for this gathering. It was more than just a reunion, it had morphed into a ceremony of solace, a reminder that the scars life left behind weren't just signs of hardship but also badges of honor, stories that could bridge the distances created by time and circumstance. As we lounged around the fire pit, roasting marshmallows and sharing light-hearted banter, I couldn't help but take note of Alan's infectious laughter, a sound that still echoed in my mind long after it faded. It pulled me back to simpler days, times when our biggest concerns revolved around surreptitious adventures rather than mortgages or career trajectories. Amid the laughter, I glanced around the circle of friends, observing familiar faces now softened by time, laughter lines deepening yet exuding a warmth that suggested resilience and shared history. Later in the night, when the conversation turned slanted under the weight of intimacy and vulnerability, I felt compelled to share a deeper part of my own journey. I spoke of my struggles with anxiety that had unraveled quietly beneath the surface like a steadily rising tide. The reactions varied, some expressed understanding, while others listened intently, searching for an anchor within my words, a piece of their own experience reflected back. In that space, my age felt like a cloak that had momentarily slipped away, revealing the essence of who we've all become, an understanding that time might play tricks on our bodies, but it also created richness within our souls. When the gathering finally dispersed under a pale moon, I felt that renewal swell within me, a hope that my friendship with Alan and the others would not wane again. In the days that followed, our pact became an organic ritual, as natural as breathing. We met every week, sharing meals, laughter, and the weight of our experiences. Together, we navigated our anxieties, our losses, and the nagging fears that haunted us. Slowly, I began to witness the remarkable transformation in us all. Alan found clarity in his career path, and his laughter returned, more uninhibited. I noticed that sharing our struggles didn't age us prematurely but rather added depth to our friendship, enriching our interactions in ways we hadn't fathomed before. Weeks rolled into months, and as seasons shifted, I felt a strange kinship with the years that had passed. Each joyous gathering turned into a celebration of what it meant to grow, not just older but, more importantly, evolved as individuals tethered through shared understanding. It was an unexpected journey, where the very things that threatened to age us, our fears, losses, regrets, actually forged unbreakable bonds. We learned that life was not just about the passage of time but about the richness of shared experiences, laughter that lingered long after we parted ways, and the unseen scars that told our stories of survival. Reflecting on it all, I realized that with each passing year, I felt less inclined to fear aging. Instead, I embraced it, recognizing that the moments that truly age a person are not so much the events themselves but how those events shape our hearts, our connections, and our understanding of what it means to be alive. And while life continues to throw its curveballs, challenges that will inevitably come, there's comfort in the knowledge that we are in this together, each experience a thread stitching us closer to one another. Months later, at another gathering meant to mark a cathartic year, Alan raised his glass, eyes sparkling with a fierce joy. "Here's to moving forward, to aging together," he proclaimed, a toast that resonated deeply within me. And I lifted my glass, not just to the friendships we had rekindled or the trials we had faced but to the beautiful realization that aging is but another chapter of living authentically, with cherished companions beside us. In the warmth of that moment, I also felt a silent promise to myself, never to take for granted the people who grace my life with their authenticity, influencing me more profoundly than the relentless march of time ever could. So, here's to the inevitable changes that life presents, always met with open arms and willing hearts, redefining the very essence of what it means to truly grow. And perhaps that's the greatest victory of all. Aging is not a solitary endeavor but a collective undertaking, a journey worth embarking on together. I never thought my childhood resentment would follow me like a shadow, but here I am, finger hovering over the post button, ready to confess something I've kept bottled up for far too long. Growing up, my older brother Ryan was the constant reminder of how fragile life could be. Born with cerebral palsy, he navigated the world in a wheelchair and required assistance with nearly everything. I'm not ashamed to admit that, as his younger sibling, I often felt overshadowed by his circumstances. At family gatherings, all the attention was on him, his struggles, his achievements, the courage he showed just by waking up every day. I remember sitting on the sidelines, feeling invisible, watching our parents dote on him. It wasn't that I hated him, exactly, it was more like a simmering envy mixed with a profound discomfort about his condition that I didn't know how to express. This imbalance strained our relationship, especially as teenagers, when Ryan became more aware of his differences. I wanted to be the brother he looked up to, but instead, I often rolled my eyes or snapped back when he would ask for help. There was one instance I remember vividly. Ryan wanted to go to a concert in the city. He was so excited, beaming with that familiar spark that I rarely saw. I could feel all the pressure mounting. I didn't want to be seen as his caregiver, his protector, just another part of his life that would make me feel smaller. So, in a moment of selfishness, I told him I couldn't go. The disappointment etched on his face left me with an ache, but I convinced myself it was easier this way. Fast forward to a few years later, the day I got the call that he had passed away suddenly due to complications from his condition. It turned my world upside down. In an instant, the past evaporated, the resentment I had harbored turned into a tide of guilt that crashed over me, pulling me under. I found myself paralyzed by regret for all the times I hadn't been there for him when it mattered the most. I replayed those harsh words in my head like a broken record, and it's like every joy from my life had dimmed in his absence. Friends and family rallied around me, offering condolences, but nothing soothed the roar of what-ifs echoing in my mind. I missed my chance to be his brother. Months passed, and as I navigated this grief, I started volunteering at a local center for disabled individuals. It felt like an act of penance, but it also opened my eyes to a world I had distanced myself from. I met so many incredible people with stories that mirrored Ryan's in some ways, and I slowly began to understand the beauty of vulnerability and strength coexisting. With each moment spent there, I felt a piece of my heart begin to mend. But what still haunted me was the anger I held towards myself. I carried a journal where I poured out my thoughts, my regrets, my moments of clarity. The act of writing became a conduit for healing I didn't know I needed, a way to say all the things I never got to say to Ryan. In one entry, I finally allowed myself to say it. I loved him. I missed him like a part of myself had been ripped away. I wished I could go back and change the past, but I also started to realize that perhaps he wouldn't want me to. Perhaps he would want me to live fully, to embrace the beauty of his memory instead of being trapped in guilt. As I sit here now, sharing this with whoever may read it, I've come to understand that sometimes our flaws and regrets shape who we become. It is a bittersweet ache, the acknowledgement of our humanity wrapped in love and loss. I can't undo what was done, and maybe that's okay. In the quiet moments, I find solace in thinking of Ryan, not as the brother I lost, but as the inspiration behind my growth, reminding me to cherish each day, to express love freely, and to reach out to those who need it most. Maybe one day, I'll pay this forward, transforming that shadow of regret into something brighter, something more profound. So here I am, hoping that others who feel the weight of unspoken words or unresolved feelings can find comfort in the fact that it's never too late to reach out, to forgive, even if that means forgiving yourself. Take it from someone who learned too late, love, in all its forms, is always worth it. As for the update, I recently went to a support group for siblings of people with disabilities, where I found the courage to share my story. And in doing so, I discovered that many others carry similar burdens of guilt and regret. Together, we're finding healing, slowly, but surely, and with each meeting, I feel more at peace with my past. Maybe Ryan's legacy is alive within us all, reminding us to love fiercely and without reservation. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm, golden hue across the park where I had spent many afternoons with Ryan, my older brother. It was a place filled with echoes of laughter and fleeting moments that now felt bittersweet. As I watched the leaves fluttering gently in the breeze, I was reminded of the stories we shared, his dry humor mixed with the uncanny ability to see life through an entirely different lens because of his disability. It was a perspective I often struggled to appreciate when I was younger. I had resented how my teenage life revolved around the concerns of his care rather than my own budding independence. I had seen him as a burden, an impediment to my social life, instead of the unique person he truly was. This resentment had sparked a schism between us, one that grew wider with each passing year until Ryan's quiet acceptance of my disdain made him retreat into himself. I wish I could go back and tell my younger self that his wheelchair wasn't a shackle, but rather a different avenue of viewing the world, one colored with resilience and strength. I remember vividly the day he passed, the cold starkness of that winter morning, a stark contrast to the warmth of memories we shared. The hospital room felt suffocating. Filled with machines that buzzed quietly, marking the slow passage of time. I sat there, frozen, as a flood of emotions enveloped me like a heavy blanket. Guilt gnawed at me, biting through my bravado as I scrolled through old pictures on my phone. I dreaded looking at them, afraid of what I might find, scenes of a childhood that had become tainted by my bitterness. In those final moments, I watched Ryan's chest rise and fall with increasing effort, each breath a painful reminder of both his fragility and strength. Tears slipped down my cheeks as I held his hand and whispered apologies, but I knew he wouldn't hear them. I felt an ache deep within me, a longing for those missed chances at reconciliation that could never be reclaimed. At the support group, I listened as others shared their stories, each personal tale a thread in a tapestry woven with guilt, regret, and ultimately, a profound love that transcended hardship. In those meetings, I recognized a shared human experience, our collective pain transformed into a bridge that connected us. One gentleman spoke of a similarly fraught relationship with his sister, and the eerie parallel struck a chord in me. The atmosphere shifted, we were no longer bound by our grief but united in our desire to heal. Slowly, I began to breathe again, letting go of the burdens I had carried for so long. I found comfort in the idea that it was okay to be imperfect, to have made mistakes. Ryan's legacy lived on, not merely as a memory but as a catalyst for change in my heart and perhaps even in the hearts of those around me. Each week, I faced the mirror of my past, and instead of seeing a villain, I began to recognize a lost child yearning for understanding. I realized that my regret could shape me, not break me, guiding me towards a gentler interaction with others, particularly in accepting their differences. Life, I had come to acknowledge, is interwoven with those we love, and the threads can be frayed and frayed again, but they always hold potential for strength and beauty if we're willing to stitch them back. Leaving the support group one evening, I paused at the entrance of the park where Ryan and I often played. Under the sprawling oak tree where his laughter once danced with the wind, I felt an unexpected sense of comfort. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry, Ryan," allowing the breeze to carry my words into the quiet night. With that, I felt weight lifting, not because I had excused my past, but because I was beginning to forgive myself. I marked that moment, a turning point in my journey of healing, knowing that even as I carry my brother's absence in my heart, I can cherish the love he gifted me. It wasn't about erasing the hurt but embracing it, learning from it. Perhaps, in his own way, he was still teaching me lessons on compassion and connection, and now, armed with awareness, I aspire to keep those lessons alive, allowing his spirit to guide me on this path of love and acceptance. With each passing week, as I attended those support group meetings, I felt more in tune with the threads of my life, a tapestry woven with the vibrant colors of grief, guilt, love, and hope. I could see the connections forming among the group, comprised of siblings who held similar burdens of regret and sorrow. The first time I shared my story publicly, I was trembling, my voice barely above a whisper as I spoke Ryan's name. The room was silent, marked by a vulnerability that seemed to hover in the air, and as I revealed my struggles, I could see the understanding reflected in the eyes of my fellow attendees. They, too, had carried the weight of resentment at times, feeling as though the world had placed them on an uneven playing field due to the circumstances of their siblings' disabilities. The empathy in that room was profound. It was a shared solace amid pain, a recognition that we often struggled to balance our own lives while supporting loved ones who required so much more. I found myself embraced not just by comforting words, but by the compassion of people who understood the longing for unspoken words between siblings, the pent-up frustration when love felt too expansive to contain, and the aching emptiness that arises when that love is lost. My healing journey began to manifest in other areas of my life as well. I became more present, embracing quiet moments with my parents, who were also grieving their own loss in a way I hadn't fully appreciated before. One evening, while sifting through old family photos, I discovered a treasure trove of moments I had forgotten, a snapshot of Ryan laughing in the sun, his face lit up with joy, surrounded by our family. That image stirred something within me. I resolved to honor his memory by deepening my connections with everyone I cherished, to embrace the whole spectrum of love Ryan had shown me. On rainy days, I would sit by the window, reminiscent of our childhood, where we would watch the world outside, chatting about the mundane and the extraordinary as we let the droplets blur the outside world. I missed those moments, the pure simplicity in which love existed without the complexities we adultified as we grew older. Those memories became my sanctuary, guiding me through my days, illuminating the parts of my character that had dimmed beneath a palette of guilt and resentment. As the support group sessions progressed, our conversations morphed into gatherings that felt more akin to family reunions. We laughed, cried, and shared recipes that were inspired by those we loved. One evening, after a particularly intense session where we spoke about our aspirations to be better siblings, we all decided to take a step further. We would host a community picnic in honor of each of our siblings, a chance to celebrate their personalities, their quirks, and the joy they brought into our lives. As we organized the event, it sparked something within me. I found myself navigating through my grief with a renewed intention. One that shone brightly for all who were willing to see. The day of the picnic was etched in gold, with a gentle breeze whispering through the park and the laughter of children drifting into the sky. Each family brought dishes that carried stories, mementos of lives lived fully despite challenges. I watched as we all shared anecdotes about our siblings, revealing layers of their existence that showcased the love that overshadowed the hardships. It turned out that Ryan's peculiar fascination with the stars and space was inherited. Others in the group shared similar fascinations. They spoke of their siblings with pride, recounting stories that illustrated resilience forged in concrete challenges. The picnic soon transformed from a gathering of remembrance to a celebration of life itself. When the sun dipped low, casting a golden hue across the park, I stood with a plate in hand, looking at the vivid display of community spirit before me. There was Ryan's favorite dish, a pasta salad my mother always made for him, adorned with fresh herbs from our garden. As I took a moment to breathe, a wave of appreciation washed over me. I realized that every bite echoed through time, a delicious reminder that in the face of heartache, connection thrives. I took that memory of Ryan, intertwined with every laugh shared and every story told that day, and tucked it gently into my heart, marking it as a chapter of my growth. Now, each morning I would wake to a sense of purpose. I carry the lessons of compassion he taught me, reaching forward with open arms to everyone I encounter. Though the guilt sometimes creeps in during quiet moments, I remind myself that healing is not linear. It's the beautiful chaos of learning how to love again fully, how to mend the heart even when it feels frayed by the threads of loss. I understand that the journey is ongoing, but I allow for its ebbs and flows, fully aware of the light Ryan ignited within me. With that glow, I walk forward, striving to share that brilliance with others, a testament to my brother's enduring spirit. I smile more often now, and though the nights may still carry a tinge of sadness, I hold on to the memory of love, ensuring that part of him will never fade as long as I remain open to the connections and love around me. There's a saying that suggests the things we buy can sometimes end up owning us, and for years, I was a prime example of that paradox, particularly when it came to the most extravagant and frankly ludicrous purchase of my life, a rare collector's edition of a board game. I still remember the day it happened, sitting on my cramped living room couch as I scrolled through an online auction website in search of something entirely mundane, a gift for my younger brother's birthday. I stumbled across an ad for a pristine, complete version of an obscure game from my childhood, the kind that had long since disappeared from shelves, and I could already smell the nostalgic fumes wafting from that box. The board, so vividly illustrated, beckoned me to dive back into a simpler time, and before I could question my judgment, I placed a bid that spiraled far beyond what I had ever intended to spend. It was a heady rush, fueled by memories of sticky summer afternoons and the laughter of friends crowded around a dining room table, yet I virtually locked myself into a cycle of self-deception, convincing myself that this $1,500 piece of cardboard and plastic would unlock not just a trip to the past, but a way to reconnect with my estranged brother, whom I hadn't seen in years due to a falling out that seemed insurmountable at the time. When the package finally arrived, I was overcome with excitement, but that high quickly dissipated as I realized I didn't know how to bridge the chasm that had formed between us since our father's passing. Still, I forced my hand and decided a game night was in order, diligently calling him and inviting him over, convinced the game was a magical portal through which we could rekindle the connection we had lost. To my surprise, he agreed. The evening unfolded with a mix of awkward silences and forced laughter as we set up the game, the pristine board lying before us like a relic of bygone days. As we began, I could see the memories flickering behind his eyes, but apprehension crept in when I realized he was less interested in the game and more in rekindling our deeper conversation, the one I had been frantically avoiding. The joy the game had promised quickly turned hollow, and soon we were disengaged, our minds elsewhere, but as the hours passed, something unexpectedly changed. During play, the childhood banter started to creep back in, the laughter became more genuine, the stress eased, and I found myself realizing that we were no longer just brothers caught in a messy past, but two people longing for a deeper connection. The game didn't mend everything, but it broke the ice, creating a fragile space for us to talk about our shared grief and the seemingly insurmountable rift it had carved in our relationship. By the end of the night, I could see the faint glimmer of hope in his eyes. We didn't leave as best friends, but we had started taking steps back toward being brothers. Reflecting back on that evening, I couldn't help but feel that the board game had been an immense waste of money in many ways, a fleeting attempt to buy back the love I felt I had lost, but maybe, just maybe, it had been worth every penny for the door it opened to something deeper. Fast forward a few months later, we still hadn't fully repaired the damage, there was still a lot of ground to cover, but we were texting more and even planning another game night. And as for the game itself, it now proudly sits on the shelf as a reminder that sometimes the things we think are just wasteful expenses can turn into the most treasured experiences, and perhaps, the biggest waste wasn't the money spent but the years we let slip by before we faced our fears and reached out. So, in a way, that overpriced collector's edition had much more value than I originally perceived, serving not as an anchor, but as the bridge leading back to my brother, a lesson learned in the most unexpected of ways, and one I carry with me every day. As I look at the collector's edition and the joy it sparked, I can't help but reflect on how much I had overlooked in life before that moment. The gamer's console sits nestled next to dusty board games and old comic books, remnants of childhood joys, waiting to be revisited. At first, I thought my nostalgia was merely a longing for the good old days, an escapism from my daily grind as a marketing coordinator for a tech company that often felt more like a cage than a career. I buried myself in work, burying feelings of disconnection, particularly with Ben, my older brother. He was always there during those carefree days, his laughter echoing through the halls of our small childhood home, two boys sharing dreams over pixelated landscapes and stories of heroism. Somewhere along the way, life had swept us into its chaotic current, and our once vibrant bond began to dull. The whole scenario ignited a fire in me. The moment I popped the disc into my console, trepidation tinged with excitement buzzed through me. I thumbed through the instructions, which curiously reopened shadows and memories of our gaming marathons, how we'd huddled on the couch, every victory celebrated with cheers, every defeat met with contagious laughter. In a fit of impulse, I sent Ben a simple text, "Hey, remember that game we loved as kids?" I got it. The silence that followed felt interminable, yet with every passing hour, the anticipation transformed into anxiety. What if he had moved on? What if he didn't want to reminisce about forgotten afternoons spent battling through virtual worlds? It was a cloudy Sunday when my phone vibrated with a response. To my surprise, it was hesitant and filled with nostalgia. "Yeah, I remember. I'd love to come over and play sometime." My heart raced at the thought of reconnecting. Preparations began, a simple cleaning of my apartment and a trip to the store for snacks. The weight of my apprehension lessened, perhaps because I knew I wasn't just preparing for a game, I was preparing for a reunion, a chance to bridge the gaps we had both let widen. The day arrived, clouds giving way to the soft glow of an autumn sun. When Ben finally stepped through my door, the air felt thick with anticipation. He looked a bit older, the kind of age that comes with grown-up responsibilities, but his grin was the same. It was a little awkward at first, small talk peppered with quiet memories, but then, as the game loaded and our avatars appeared on the screen, laughter began to pour out as easily as it had all those years ago. The screen reflected not just our characters, but the brothers we used to be, fearless and united against any challenge. Time melted away as we navigated the game's world, reliving old strategies and sharing stories from our lives, each tale reconnecting pieces of our diverged paths. The more we played, the lighter the conversation became, peeling back layers of hurt, disappointment, and misunderstandings that lingered between us like an unspoken truce. I could feel my heart swell as nostalgia danced in the air, wonder replacing the sorrow of neglected years. In that moment, no overpriced game could feel like a waste, it had become the undeniable catalyst for healing. And with every level we conquered together, we also conquered the past, transforming it from a burden into a shared journey, something to be appreciated rather than regretted. When we finally stepped away from the screen, it was dark outside, the only light coming from the moon hanging silently above us. I could sense a change in Ben, a weight lifted that he didn't even know he was carrying. We sat side by side, finishing off the last of the snacks, our earlier inhibitions gone, our laughter echoing in the cozy silence. In the days and weeks that followed, our Wednesday night gaming sessions became something we both looked forward to, a rekindled tradition. Each week, we navigated through new worlds and battled countless foes, each session solidifying our connection further. I realized, in those quiet moments of gaming and sharing, that it wasn't just about escapism. It was about allowing ourselves to be vulnerable again, to open doors we thought were forever shut. Ben and I began to share more about life, our struggles at work, relationships, and the hopes we had for the future, the laughter transforming into heartfelt conversations we had long neglected. As I now sit here recalling all of this, I recognize it wasn't just the game that was overpriced, but the years we let slip by in silence. Yet how beautifully ironic it was that a seemingly trivial purchase had sparked the most precious gift. It had led us back to each other. The lesson, indeed, was invaluable, a reminder that sometimes, in the chase of adulthood, we forget to invest in the relationships that matter most. So here I am, the collector's edition game now more than just a forgotten relic, it's a bridge to shared moments, a reminder of how time can be reclaimed. As I hit the lights and settle down for sleep, I can't help but smile, feeling grateful for what once seemed like a waste of money transformed into a treasured investment in love and laughter. And perhaps it's appropriate that I leave this story, not in solitude but with a broader message. Sometimes it takes a little push, a reminder, a ridiculous purchase, to face our fears, reconnect, and revive the bonds that make life worth living. Update, just yesterday, Ben texted me, a simple message that brimming with excitement. Guess what? I found an old console in the attic. Let's have a retro game night next week. And as I felt the flutter of anticipation spark again, I couldn't help but think, sometimes, it's the simplest of things that remind us of the biggest joys, often hiding in plain sight, waiting patiently to be rediscovered. As I sat on my couch, my phone still warm from the recent text, I couldn't shake the anticipation swirling in my chest. Ben, my brother, and I had spent countless hours lost in the worlds of chunky pixels and vibrant retro soundtracks, our laughter echoing through the living room as we battled pixelated monsters and solved puzzles together. Those golden days slipped away, buried beneath the weight of life's demands and the silence that had stretched between us over the years, a silence that seemed to expand the longer we avoided acknowledging it. But now, with his simple invitation, a door to the past nudged open, and I felt a wave of warmth wash over me. I could almost hear our old melodies, the triumphant victory music from that one game that had always been our favorite, the soundtrack of childhood. It beckoned me, coaxing me out of my present worries and back into those carefree moments where nothing else mattered but the next level. The week leading up to our retro game night felt almost surreal. I scoured online marketplaces for vintage snacks to recreate that nostalgic atmosphere, the cheesy puffs and sticky sweet sodas we used to consume in careless abandon. With each item I ordered, I felt like I was piecing together a time capsule, a small celebration of all we had, and all we almost lost. Occasionally, I would replay our last encounter in my mind, the unspoken words hanging in the air laden with years of unshed tears and frustrations. I could hear my own thoughts, criticizing myself for letting so much time slip away even as I felt the tight-knit fabric of our bond beginning to mend, one thread at a time. Finally, the day of the game night arrived. I prepared the living room like a scene out of one of those cheesy romantic films, couch cushions tossed aside, the old console hooked up to the TV, and munchies laid out in carefully curated chaos, just like the good old days. When Ben showed up, a slight nervousness tugged at my stomach. What if the years had changed him? What if awkward silence replaced the laughter? He walked in, his eyes darting around as they landed on the setup. "You went all out, didn't you?" Ben laughed, a sound I had missed so dearly, and just like that, the tension eased. As we sat down on the floor, surrounded by the familiar scent of cheesy snacks and the glow of the screen, I felt the years peel away. We started with a game, and I watched as he instinctively placed his hands on the controller, a glint of competitive desire sparking in his eyes. I remembered this. I remembered him. We fell into a rhythm, laughter bubbling up freely as we shared stories about our lives, his exciting new city adventures and my mundane workdays, but what mattered was our willingness to share once again. I could feel the crack forming in the wall we'd built, our words smoothing the edges of misunderstandings long past. "Do you remember?" he would ask, his voice trailing off like a nostalgic melody, and I'd smile, reminding him of the time we lost our save file on a particularly hard level and how we wept for hours over pixelated losses. Hours passed as the night slipped away, each round blurring into the next, our collective laughter filling the air like music, enchanting and bittersweet. Shadows lengthened as we explored past worlds long forgotten, but every level we conquered felt like not just a nostalgic journey of pixels but the beginnings of a new era for us. At one point, I looked over at Ben as we both burst into laughter over an inside joke from a long-lost game. It brought tears of joy to my eyes. I realized that the biggest waste was never the money spent on that collector's edition. It was the regret of lost time, the bitter reality of so many moments I thought were too late to reclaim. As we finally put the games away, I felt a surge of gratitude crash over me. Ben flopped back onto the couch, his head tilted back while a blissful smile lingered on his face. "We should do this more often," he said, and it struck me as both a suggestion and a promise. I nodded, feeling the warmth of connection wrap around us, knowing that we'd let this night become a new chapter, the kind I had almost forfeited through years of silence and distraction. I finally understood the true value behind that wasteful purchase. It wasn't the game but what it led us to, the reclaiming of time, the rediscovering of bonds. "How about we make a plan for every month?" I suggested, my heart racing at the prospect of future adventures and memories waiting to be forged. The conversation flowed seamlessly from there, possibilities unfolding like a blooming flower. And as I got up to grab more snacks, the sound of his laughter still echoing in my ears, I felt light and optimistic, a grounded sign that the burdens of the past would not define us. Sometimes, it turns out, in the most unexpected corners of our lives, we find threads of connection waiting to be woven anew, just waiting for us to take a leap and reach out, echoing the broader message that life should be lived, explored, and above all, shared with those we love. Update: since that magical night, Ben and I have instated a regular gaming evening, retro games, new releases, and even board games to shake things up. With every session, we laugh louder and talk deeper, and on a whim, last month, we even invited some old friends to join us. Suddenly our humble living room felt like a reunion of sorts. I often think how that one impulsive purchase opened the floodgates of joy, helping us reclaim not just our relationship but the essence of what it means to share moments together. Sometimes, the things we dread, the conversations we put off, can become the brightest chapters in a story we're still writing. And while we've had our challenges, I know one truth for certain: it's never too late to start anew, one game, one laugh, one memory at a time. There was a small, nondescript bar on the corner of Maple and 6th, a place where the neon lights flickered like a heartbeat, pulsing softly against the darkened streets of the town as if calling out to lost souls seeking refuge from the weight of their lives. I found myself propped up on a weathered stool, staring into a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid swirling like thoughts I couldn't quite grasp. This evening was like many others, where I sought solace in the bottom of a bottle to drown out the disappointments of a life that felt increasingly unremarkable. At 38, the corners of my world had grown narrower, my marriage to Sarah had become a long, quiet sigh we both struggled to stifle, and my once vibrant dreams had dulled to mere memories aching to be revisited. As I took a deep breath, I prepared to face the same unrelenting questions that had haunted me. Was it all worth it? Was leaving the mundane comfort of my life worth the risk of the unknown? That's when I felt a presence beside me, a chill that crawled up my spine like fingers tracing a spine. I turned my head, curiosity overcoming trepidation, and there he was, a man clad in shadows, his eyes the color of storm clouds promising rain, yet oddly calm. He raised an eyebrow and motioned toward my drink. "Finish your drink, it's time to go," he said, his voice smooth yet chilling, reverberating in the air between us like a whisper shared over grave secrets. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to decipher the meaning behind his words. Go where? The question slipped from my lips, laced with disbelief and a hint of defiance. Death didn't saddle up next to a guy like me at a bar, at least, not in any way I had ever envisioned. As the seconds melted into each other, I felt an odd mixture of fear and resignation drown my thoughts. Here was a moment where the certainty of life clashed with the enticing promise of an escape that the impossible had never offered. I had spent so much time contemplating what lay on the other side of living, now confronted by a figure that embodied it, I felt every uncertainty crash against that newfound realization. "I've seen what awaits you," he said, his voice low, betraying no emotion. "Not just the end, but everything that stands before it and the lives entwined with yours. Their sorrow, their hope, the way they'd miss you." I felt an ache in my chest, a desperation to cling to the threads of life I had thus far taken for granted. Memories of Sarah flashed in my mind, the way her laughter would echo like silver bells around our home, the taste of her kisses that lingered long after they faded, the warmth of her hand in mine during quiet moments that no longer held the same weight. And yet, like all things, they felt dimmed against the gravity of this moment. "And what if I don't want to go?" I asked, my voice trembling, a mixture of defiance and fear. "What if I have more to give?" The man beside me regarded me quietly, a flicker of something, a tinge of understanding, crossing his stormy gaze. "Your choice. Life has always been about choices. But you must ask yourself, are you really living? Or merely existing?" The question hung in the air, heavy and imbued with a challenge I hadn't considered until that moment. My thoughts spiraled to the realities that awaited me, the stagnant evenings spent binge-watching shows instead of sharing stories with Sarah, the hours clocked in at a job that drained the very vitality from my bones, leaving me little but a shadow at home. I thought of the dreams tucked away in boxes, gathering dust like forgotten photographs, my passion for painting, my desire to travel the world, to truly embrace every single heartbeat of this existence. The revelation hit me, perhaps I owed it not just to myself, but to Sarah, to remind us both of the vibrancy life could still offer, not the sunset but the dawn ripe with possibilities. The unexpected realization emerged slowly, rising like a phoenix from the ashes of dread. "What if I want to stay?" I heard myself say, a strange mix of determination and vulnerability. "What if I want to make things right?" At that, the man gave a nod, his demeanor calm yet penetrating. "Then you know what you must do. Sometimes, it isn't about the moments we fear but the ones we choose to embrace." With that, he faded, slipping into the shadows, leaving me alone at the bar, a glass half full in my trembling hand. There was clarity in that final encounter, a spark igniting the shadows of my mind. After that night, I began to reclaim my life, painting again, pursuing dreams once abandoned, breathing new life into the stagnant corners of my marriage. When I returned home that night, I found Sarah still awake, her silhouette soft against the backdrop of moonlit curtains. I shared my journey, the encounter haunting yet liberating, and as we embraced, I felt the heavy chains of complacency start to melt away. In those quiet hours, laughter returned, filling the void that had stretched between us like an endless chasm. I learned how making the choice to move forward and not retreat could turn each drink into a toast, a celebration for life over death, for existence over mere living. As for the question of what lay beyond, I knew it was a mystery I'd unravel one day, but not today. Today, I chose to savor the now. Update: it's been 6 months since that night at the bar, and since then, I've embraced change with open arms. Our home now resonates with laughter, spontaneous trips, and color splashed across canvases. Just last week, Sarah and I took a long weekend trip to the coast, something we talked about but had never done, and I created a piece that conveys the essence of that experience. I think I finally understand what the cloaked man meant about truly living. It's great to feel vibrant again. Life's too short to simply wait for fate to intervene. Sometimes, you must take the reins and weave your own fate. As I sit here, reflecting on the changes that have blossomed in what once felt like a monochrome existence, I can't help but marvel at how far I've come since that fateful encounter with death at the bar. It sounds surreal, almost like the plot of some fantastical novel, but there's a stark clarity in my memories that elevates them from a mere heady swirl of emotion into something profound and tangible. The moments Sarah and I have shared recently shimmer with a new light, each laugh and whispered secret a brushstroke on the canvas of my transformed life. The weekend at the coast was a revelation. We drove along the winding roads, the salty breeze playfully tugging at our hair as waves crashed rhythmically against the shore. Standing before the vastness of the ocean, I felt both small and infinitely alive, just like that feeling described in cheesy motivational quotes I used to roll my eyes at. As I took my first deep, salty breath, I closed my eyes and let the sound of the water drown out my nervous thoughts. It reminded me that potential and possibility are infinite, much like the horizon stretching ahead of us. Later, as the sun dipped into the ocean, I set up my easel in the sand, each brushstroke representing an emotion I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. The vibrant blues, fiery oranges, and soft purples mirrored the effervescent quality of that sunset, capturing a moment that felt both transient and eternal. Sarah joined me, sitting cross-legged next to me on the cool sand. Her keen eyes flickered from my canvas to the horizon as we talked about everything and nothing, feeling entirely at home in our shared vulnerability, and in that moment, I felt a swell of gratitude wash over me. But the growth hasn't been without its challenges. With every exhilarating moment came a reminder of the past I lived so desperately to escape. There were times when I'd turned to my old habits, workaholism and perfectionism, and moments when silence filled the air as we grappled with unspoken fears. I realized the journey was not just about living vividly but about confronting the shadows that had trailed me during those monotonous years. It was an intricate dance of light and dark, one deserving of exploration. And just as I was understanding the nuances of this duality, the idea of death became more of an abstract companion rather than a menacing specter. It turned into a guiding force whispering encouragement rather than demanding presence. One evening, while painting a tribute to our travels, I paused, letting the brush hover above the canvas as Sarah stepped outside to grab us coffee. I could feel death sitting at the edge of my mind, reminding me of the fleeting nature of these moments. Would the vibrant colors I splashed on the canvas fade as the years rolled on? Would they hold the memories locked within, shimmering brightly or dulled by the passage of time? That's when it hit me. It is the act of creation, the love I imbued into each stroke, that lends permanence to these experiences. I don't need to fear death if I live authentically. I can delve deep into the wellspring of life until it overflows, mingling with the colors of those fleeting moments. Sarah returned then, humming softly to herself, and just the sight of her sparked an uncontainable joy within me. I set the brush down and took a moment to hold her gaze, to bask in the warmth of our shared space. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her voice soothing yet curious. I smiled, the words tumbling out unfiltered. "What if I painted a mural in our living room, something that captures all the laughter, all the moments, us?" Her eyes lit up, and in that instant, I recognized a shared understanding. We were both co-creating a life of vivid colors, resplendent with the laughter of our now and the hope for our tomorrow. So, here I am now, as I write this, in our sun-drenched living room, surrounded by swathes of color, feeling the pulse of life surging through me like a melody. We're gearing up for our next adventure, a spontaneous plan to explore the mountains, where I hope to capture the majesty of life interwoven with stillness, and perhaps I'll paint another breath of existence onto canvas. Life, I have learned, isn't meant to be a series of what-ifs or if-onlys, it's a series of let's-goes constructed from moments of pure, unabashed joy. And as for death? Oh, it still sits at the bar, ever watchful, but now, I find a certain comfort in glancing over occasionally, raising my glass in a silent toast, a reminder that it's okay to embrace the ephemeral beauty of life and to live it fully until the time comes to hand over the reins. One evening, while I was cleaning up after Sarah had made a delicious dinner full of spices and laughter, my phone buzzed on the table, a message from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. It was a simple text, just a photo of a sunset taken at a remote spot we used to frequent, accompanied by the words, "Remember when we used to chase sunsets? Let's do it again." I felt a wave of nostalgia wash over me, mixed with an insatiable urge to reconnect. The tall, Warm memories began to coil around me like an old blanket, comfortable yet fragile, reminding me of a time when life felt both simpler and more profound, full of shared dreams and laughter echoing against the backdrop of fading light. I wanted to say yes, to embrace that adventurous spirit I had recently revived, but the reality of everyday life nudged at me like a persistent child eager for attention. The clock ticked steadily, reminding me of responsibilities, of the cozy routine I had built since embracing change. That night, after putting the dishes away, I brought Sarah a fresh cup of herbal tea and shared my thoughts. She listened intently, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Why not?" she said, her enthusiasm infectious. "We can chase sunsets together, just like old times. I've always wanted to take that trip to the mountains, and this seems like the perfect opportunity." Her words ignited a fire within me. It became clear that this was a chance not just to reconnect with my past but also to strengthen my present. The next morning, we planned the trip. Sarah's infectious laughter spurred us on as we sent texts back and forth, packing lists bouncing from my phone to hers. Soon, each task became an excuse to steal glances at one another, relishing the anticipation that built with every fleeting moment. And so, with nothing but the open road before us, a cooler packed with snacks, and art supplies tucked in the trunk, we rolled down the windows, letting the wind embrace us as we left our quaint little town behind in the fading light of day. The mountains rose before us, majestic and commanding, shrouded in lush greens and the promise of undiscovered horizons. That first evening, we stopped at a small clearing, and my heart danced as the sun began its descent, painting the sky with hues of orange, pink, and deep purple. I grabbed my easel, and in that magnificent moment, I felt alive, brimming with thoughts and colors screaming to be captured. As I painted, Sarah interjected with stories of our youth, tales that had faded into the background but now sprung to life under the twilight sky. She told me of camping trips where we had almost gotten lost, of nights spent under a stretch of stars that felt infinite, and each story layered into my memories like a new brushstroke on canvas. The next days unfolded beautifully, with mornings spent hiking up trails and afternoons weaving through local markets where we tasted fresh berries and artisan cheeses, savoring every bite as though we were indulging in stolen secrets. The world blossomed around us, and soon we came to a makeshift picnic table where we shared our favorite wines, laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves. One evening, as dusk draped the landscape, we climbed a small hill and watched the sun make its grand exit, the sky adorned with its glorious palette. It was then that I truly felt the fullness of living. I looked at Sarah, and her face was illuminated by the faint glow of the setting sun, her smile wide and genuine. I felt grateful, vibrating with the realization that every moment we chose to embrace life brought us closer, not just to each other, but to a profound understanding of what it means to willingly embrace the beauty and fragility of existence. Laughing in the glow of the fading day, I confessed, I think I get it now. All those moments we put off because we were just waiting for the right time? Each of those what-ifs wouldn't come close to the actual joys we experience when we say let's go. Her eyes twinkled, mirroring the magnificent stars that had begun to sprinkle the sky. "Let's keep saying let's go then," she responded softly, and in that moment, I realized that the cloaked figure, my constant reminder of mortality, had indeed become a mentor of sorts, urging me on, not with fear, but with the sweet impermanence of life, urging me to make the most of the moments I had. Now, even after returning home, my heart still thrums with an insatiable need for adventure. I often find myself wandering through galleries for inspiration, letting my brushes dance across canvases, each stroke reminding me that while death may sit quietly at the bar, it's not the end but rather a soft invitation to embrace every fleeting breath along the way. And on quiet nights when I can feel the weight of solitude surround me like a gentle blanket, I still raise a glass to that figure in the distance, not out of fear, but in gratitude for the lessons learned. With the canvas of my life now filled with vibrant splashes, I'm ready for every let's go that beckons on the horizon, forever aware but unshackled by the ticking clock. What adventures are waiting just beyond the dusk? I suppose we'll find out together, one beautiful moment at a time. I never imagined that a single night could unravel so much of my carefully constructed life, but there I was, standing in my dimly lit kitchen, stomach churning with panic as I replayed the events of the evening over and over in my mind. It all began as any ordinary Saturday. I was at home, enjoying a quiet evening after a grueling week at the office, feeling the weight of the world lift just a little as I prepared to indulge in my favorite comfort food, macaroni and cheese. I was halfway through boiling the pasta when I heard an urgent knock at my door. My heart raced. It was unusual for anyone to visit me unannounced, especially this late. When I opened the door, my neighbor, Sarah, stood there, her breathing heavy, face pale, and hair disheveled. She had always been the burst of energy on our otherwise quiet street, but tonight she looked like a ghost, trembling and wide-eyed. "We need to get inside, now," she whispered, pulling me into her apartment without waiting for a response. Before I could grasp the situation, her hand motioned to the window where I saw fear reflecting in her eyes as she explained something I could barely comprehend. She spoke of some chemical cloud that had emerged from the abandoned factory on the outskirts of town, claiming it was dangerous, potentially life-threatening. I could almost feel the air grow denser around us, but I was skeptical. It seemed bizarre and conjured images of a poorly written horror flick. Yet, the urgency in her voice cracked through my layers of disbelief, and I could see she was genuinely frightened. It wasn't long before the acrid smell wafted in through the window, causing immediate dread to claw at my chest. I had learned a little about chemistry in college. I knew enough to also understand that some poisons can fester without notice. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach as I shut the window and joined her on the couch, trying to piece together what we should do. As time passed in silence, the tension rapidly escalated. Outside, the muted chaos of sirens wailed in the distance, mingling with Sarah's quiet whimpers. I could tell she was spiraling. Despite my best efforts to reassure her, her breathing quickened, and soon I felt it too. The anxiety swirling in the room felt palpable. I propped up my phone on the coffee table, searching for updates or guidance from local news, anything to anchor us in reality, but then my fingers hesitated over a pop-up ad flashing on the screen. It was a promotional video for a new detoxification product that claimed to counteract chemical exposure. It was ridiculous of me to even consider it, but desperation does strange things to rational thought, and before long I had taken a deep breath and waded further into that dark abyss of misjudgment. "Let's try it," I suggested, wrestling through the lump in my throat. Sarah stared at me, her eyes wide and glossy, and for a moment, I thought she would refuse, but then that fear flickered, and with it, a look of agreement washed over her face. We knew it could be a scam, we knew that it could be even worse than doing nothing, but there we were, both of us grasping for anything that offered hope. We mixed the strange powder into water, the eerie fluorescent green swirling into a murky blend. With shaking hands, we divided the concoction between us and downed it, the taste nearly bile-like, and much to my horror, I could feel a knot of guilt twisting inside me. Soon after we drank it, reality blurred against the rising terror of what we'd done, along with what was happening outside in our town. Perhaps I should have called someone, or maybe we could have just stayed indoors, but that ill-fated choice only paved the way for more panic. The minutes dragged on, and suddenly Sarah bolted for the bathroom, retching and wailing in horror. My heart pounded violently against my ribcage. I watched her in a disoriented state, confused about whether I should comfort her or be terrified of what the potion had done. She came back, crumpled on the floor, flushed and sweaty, and I could see the blame settling between us, thick like poison itself. I wanted to scream at her for suggesting it, she wanted to scream at me for going along with it. The reality of what we had done set like cold cement in my stomach, the dread consuming every ounce of rational thought. Nothing felt right anymore, and in that moment of chaos, I lost control. In an outburst fueled by fear, I vented what I really thought about her and the mess we had just dived into. My words came out like daggers, slicing through the air, and as soon as they left my lips, I regretted them. "This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't come over looking for help," I shouted, horrified by the vitriol I directed at someone who, moments ago, I would have called my friend. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, the weight of my accusation smashing into her thin frame, and for a moment, I felt the world still around us. I hated how quickly I had attacked her, and yet I couldn't untangle the worry that had transformed into resentment so quickly, nor could I undo the hurt that painted her face. As the panic surged around us, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that the potion and the night's chaos were somehow intertwined, leaving everything spiraling beyond our control. I reached down to apologize, to reclaim the fragile bond we had before this all began, but the doorbell rang, and before I could react, Sarah fled to answer it, her fear conflating with urgency. I stood alone in the swirling mix of regret and anxiety, unable to voice the torment that pressed down on me as I listened to the voice of a paramedic outside, growing concerned about our unfamiliar reaction. I found solace in the idea of absolution, the hope that admitting what had happened would mend the frayed seams of the night. Ultimately, the shadows of my panic, my loud accusations, and the desperate measures we took wrapped around me like a heavy fog. Now, as I stand, looking at the aftermath of my words echoing into the late-night stillness, I know I must confront what I did, hoping that my confessions could provide some insight into the fragile line we walk when fear bleeds into blame. No update for now, This is where I leave it, a story unraveled but not finished. As I stood there, bathed in the muted glow of the streetlights, the last remnants of the panic-induced adrenaline began to fade from my body, leaving behind a dull ache in my chest. I could still hear Anna's voice piercing through the chaos, the way she cried for help and how the tension in the air tightened around us like a noose. It was a knife's edge we danced upon, teetering between vulnerability and paranoia. The events had spiraled so quickly, it felt surreal, like a fever dream I couldn't wake up from. Moments before the sirens had shared their chilling song with us, it was just another Friday night, a few drinks after work, laughter echoing through our modest apartment as Anna and I sat on our worn-out couch, sharing embarrassing stories from our years together. Things turned sinister fast, though, when a strange smell wafted in from our open window, smoky and acrid, an odor so sharp it felt like it belonged to another world. Before we could even piece together what was happening, dizziness hit me, and I saw Anna slump to the side, grasping her throat, her eyes wide in alarm. Panic surged through me in a torrent, my mind racing with a single mantra: save her. My world shifted as I flailed under the weight of responsibility. I bolted outside, desperately calling for help, though the words felt caught in my throat, tangled in knots of fear. Neighbors emerged, concerned and confused, but as I waved my arms in frantic gestures, I saw their faces twist with suspicion and fear. I could feel it, the judgment laying itself across my shoulders like a mantle I hadn't asked for. In my desperation, I grabbed the nearest object, anything to emphasize the urgency of the situation, and clutched a garden spade, wielding it like a knight's sword. My tone shifted as I pointed it at a group of bystanders, accusing them of negligence, of failing to see what was unfolding, the potential catastrophe waiting to bloom before our eyes. The spade, a symbol of my misplaced fury, had become an instrument of chaos rather than salvation. I could hear Anna yelling my name, her voice a distant sound that strained to break through the fog of hysteria. In that moment of sheer panic and misplaced aggression, I had become the very thing I was trying to combat. How could I have lost myself like that? The guilt crashed over me like waves, drowning my sense of reason. Eventually, shouting sirens jolted everyone, and professionals swarmed the scene, taking control, but they had seen me, frantic and armed, the chaotic shadow of fear painted across my face. As they worked on Anna, my accusations lingered in the air like the remnants of that foul chemical that had thrown us into turmoil. I had turned from her protector to her accuser, my hands shaking not from the aftermath of the substance but from the realization of my brutality. We spent hours at the hospital, Anna recovering under the watchful eyes of medical staff. I sat in the waiting room, anxiously glancing at the clock, each tick mocking my inability to fix what I wrecked with mere words. I had to face her, face what I had done, confront the demons I had unleashed in my panic. When they finally summoned me into her room, I took a shaky breath, feeling unbearably small. Anna lay there, looking so fragile amid the hospital blankets, her face drawn but eyes still holding a flicker of defiance. I stumbled through an inadequate apology, each word seemed insipid compared to the reality of the night. I didn't mean for it to get that way, was all I could muster, fighting back the tears that stung my eyes. She just looked at me for a moment that felt like eternity, then asked the question that ripped through my heart: why did you turn on me? A question so piercing, I felt it carve itself into the very center of my being. I could have broken down right there, I could have explained how fear reshaped my mind, how the layers of security I felt crumbled when I saw her in distress, the confusion of not knowing if I could trust what my senses told me. But standing there, faced with the raw truth of my actions, I couldn't speak. Instead, I leaned forward, placing my head in my hands, my breath hitching with the weight of remorse I had been carrying. Seconds stretched into minutes, until I felt her hand on my back, a gentle reminder that despite everything, we were still together. The silence that followed held its own weight, both an apology and a question, an invitation to understand that sometimes the worst damage comes not from the hands that inflict harm but from the panic born from fear of losing someone you love. As we both sat in that fragile silence, we started to piece together our broken night. Anna shared her own fright, revealing how isolation and the feeling of abandonment in that chaotic moment tightened around her, just as my accusations had. Our hearts cracked open in the tender glow of understanding. There were shared fears and vulnerabilities that had twisted our perception that night, grief and paranoia woven into our bond. It was a moment of raw honesty, one that would not erase my actions but could potentially stitch up the wounds festering between us. We held on to that realization, fragile as it was, knowing that the shadows of our panic would remain part of our story, a brush with darkness that would ultimately guide us both closer to light. And now, standing outside in that stillness, I realized that the confession isn't about demonizing myself but about embracing the imperfections of love and fear. Admitting that we are both searching for absolution, not from the mistakes we make, but from the understanding that sometimes the horror lies in how we react when the ground beneath us gives way. Life, with all its fear and uncertainty, can bind us more tightly than we anticipate, leaving imprints we prefer to mask. But here, with my confession, I choose to confront rather than deny, sharing our tale as an unfinished thread, evidence of resilience in the heart of human frailty. I can't rewind the night, nor can I return the sharp edges of my accusations. Instead, I hope that in sharing this tale, we can both learn to navigate that fragile line between fear and love, tangled yet unbreakable, moving forward toward understanding one breath at a time. As I sit in the stillness of my dimly lit room, the hum of the street outside a distant reminder of life continuing in its usual course, I find myself drawn back to the events that transpired just hours ago, the night that transformed into a chaotic whirlwind of emotions fueled by panic and chemical memories. It all began innocuously enough, just another evening spent at home with Amy, my partner of 4 years, sharing our latest find on Netflix, laughter punctuating the cozy atmosphere, a glass of wine in each of our hands as the day's stresses seemed to dissipate into the flickering glow of the television screen. But then, around 10 o'clock, amid bites of popcorn and lighthearted banter, there was a strange knock at the door that shattered our bubble. I paused, my heart quickening. Something in that abrupt sound felt off, a sharp note that sent a cold shiver down my spine. Amy had exchanged a glance with me, one that I had now come to identify as the look of instinctual dread, her brow furrowed as she paused the show. We were both rooted in that moment, unspoken fears hanging in the air like static electricity. Who could that be at this hour? She whispered, her voice barely above a murmur, as I, against my better judgment, approached the door, hoping it was just a friendly neighbor or a late-night delivery. Instead, when I opened it, everything changed. A group of men, their faces half shrouded in hooded sweatshirts, stood there, eyes glistening with determination and perhaps something more sinister. Before I could fully process the situation, a sharp smell invaded my senses, something acrid and metallic, causing my throat to tighten as I started to choke. The next moments were a blur, shots of adrenaline blinding me as they shoved a canister into our home, releasing a thick mist that quickly enveloped the hallway, hanging heavily like a shroud between us and freedom. I felt dread creeping up my spine as I stumbled backward, and instinct took over. The first thought that flashed through my mind was to protect Amy at all costs. My heart raced, my breath came in frantic bursts, and while logic urged me to seek caution, panic swelled within me, drowning out my rationality. In the chaos, I rallied my thoughts to grab her hand, but the contorted expressions on the intruders' faces, hints of laughter that cut through my fear, ignited something darker within me. "Get out. We don't have anything for you," I screamed, words spilling out in a harsh, defensive growl that I barely recognized. I shoved a nearby plant pot toward them, a final desperate gesture, but as Amy screamed in disbelief, I could sense my own failure to protect her tearing at the edges of my sanity. In the haze of panic, I accused her in my heightened state, a horrible confession slipping from my lips that she should have done something, anything more to prepare us for an attack like this. As those words left me, I saw the hurt collect in her eyes, the reflection of my fears etching deeper scars into our bond. There, amidst the swirling chaos, I had not only welcomed danger but had turned on the one person I loved most in the world. The intruders fled soon after, seemingly sensing our vulnerability and choosing not to engage further, shadows moving quickly in the dark. The reality of the empty air left behind hit me with the force of a tidal wave. We were standing in our own safe space, a sanctuary that had violated what we believed to be true. I sank to my knees, the weight of my anger, confusion, and unbridled fear crashing hard against my chest. "I am so sorry," I breathed, my voice hoarse, but the words felt inadequate, nothing compared to the guilt that now lingered in the silence. I could see Amy standing there, framed in the low light, a silhouette of shock, fragile, trembling, as she drew away from me physically and emotionally, a chasm opening between us. I watched her retreat, each step marked not just by her physical distance but by the raw heartache that lay heavy between us, growing wider with each passing moment. It would be hours until we could delve into the ramifications of the night, but even in our attempts to regain some semblance of normalcy, I could hear the echoes of my accusations, the betrayal of fear twisting a bond forged through trust. When morning came, the sunlight crept through the curtains, bathing everything in a harsh reality I wished to escape. But I knew, in confronting the pain and uncertainty, we had the chance to rebuild. I lay in the silence beside her, each breath filled with an unbearable weight of regret and longing for reconciliation. I yearned to convey the agonizing truth that I had acted out of sheer terror, that in the throes of panic, I had shattered her sense of safety instead of protecting it. The road to healing would be fraught with difficult conversations, but from this raw wound, I hoped we could come to understand each other in ways we had not dared before. I finally nudged closer, seeking her warmth, craving forgiveness and connection because while fear may have tried to sever us, love held a capacity to mend, even the most fractured of hearts. Sharing this story doesn't erase the actions of last night, nor does it unravel the fateful words that spilled unbidden from my lips, but I hope that in opening this dialogue, we can better navigate our experiences together. As the sun cast our silhouettes against the wall, an unfinished painting, my heart swelled with cautious hope, the understanding that trust can be torn and frayed yet can come back together stronger, each thread weaving into the greater tapestry of our love. Walking that thin line between fear and love may forever be our journey, but perhaps, just perhaps, we would emerge more resilient together, each confession a path to healing, each misstep a step toward newfound understanding, intertwining as we move forward, one breath at a time. I have this recurring dream, the kind that stays with you long after you wake up, lingering at the edges of your consciousness like a familiar fog. In it, I'm back in my small apartment, the walls adorned with mismatched memorabilia from my childhood, and the glow of the television casts soft shadows across the clutter. I'd curled up on the couch, a spirited mixture of pillows and warm blankets, with the familiar theme song of my absolute comfort show echoing in my ears. If there's anything uniting my college friends and me over the years, it's the series we could watch a million times and never tire of, That Cozy Life. It's a quirky sitcom about a group of friends maneuvering through life's ups and downs, with quirky plots that always ended in heartwarming moments and the kind of humor that felt like a hug. One evening, while taking a break from my work, I decided to indulge in a binge-watch session. I reached the episode where one of the characters, Elizabeth, confronts her insecurities when her childhood friend returns to town with a life that seems so picture-perfect. As the weight of her feelings washed over her, I felt a pang of recognition ripple through me. It was subtle yet profound, an uninvited reminder of the mounting pressure I felt about my own life choices. You see, I graduated with a degree in literature a year prior, but while my friends soared into burgeoning careers, I found myself working part-time at a local bookstore, surrounded by the musty scent of old pages while my dreams remained wedged between the spines of books I longed to write. I began to question everything, feeling much like my on-screen counterpart caught in a storm of self-doubt, waiting for that breakthrough moment. It was during this time that I reconnected with Mia, my childhood best friend who had left our sleepy town to conquer the big city. In a flurry of excited messages, we agreed to meet up, and I desperately hoped she would bring with her the kind of ambition that once inspired me. When we finally met, we sat in our favorite cafe, the smell of fresh coffee enveloping us as we reminisced about those blissful days of youth that seemed so simplistic in retrospect. Yet as she spoke about her fast-paced life filled with exciting opportunities and endless networking, I could feel my own insecurities rising like a tide. Her sizable success felt intimidating, and my aspirations felt small and silly, as if I'd pitifully missed the memo on how to transform dreams into reality. The hours melted away, but my feelings of inadequacy only deepened. It was then that the memory of That Cozy Life flickered back into my mind, specifically its ability to weave lessons into its light-hearted fabric. I could almost hear Elizabeth's voice saying that success wasn't just a straight path but a winding road filled with bumps and detours, better shared with friends who understood your journey. Finding comfort in this thought, I invited Mia to watch an episode with me, hoping it would create a moment of connection, even in our divergent paths. Surprisingly, she agreed. We laughed until our sides hurt while watching Elizabeth's comedic misadventures and heart-forward journey. When the finale credits rolled, I shared with Mia how the show had always been my safe haven, a means to escape whenever I felt overwhelmed by the real world. In return, she opened up about her struggles with feeling lonely despite her successes, revealing that behind the glimmering facade, she often craved the depth of true connection, something our bond once provided effortlessly. It felt liberating, sharing our vulnerabilities, almost like we were both characters in an episode, two old friends who wandered off script only to find their way back together. By the dusk of that evening, the weight of the world felt lighter, the connection we re-established was profound yet simple. Little did I know that this reconciliation would serve as the catalyst for my journey toward embracing my dreams without the harsh lens of comparison. The days turned into weeks as I found solace in rewatching my beloved series whenever I felt the pressures of adult life creeping up again, allowing those comforting episodes to remind me of the importance of my own narrative. As the months rolled by, I slowly began to pen my own stories, starting with daily snippets inspired by moments observed at the bookstore, drawings from our cafe escapades, and the laughter shared in those newly forged memories. Just the other night, I received a message from Mia that made my heart flutter. She relayed how she'd been watching That Cozy Life too, and found every episode echoing her doubts and aspirations, much like mine. With a burst of excitement and courage, I told her about my new writing project and asked if she'd consider being a beta reader. With her enthusiastic response, I realized the comfort show that warmed our hearts had woven its lessons tightly into our lives, allowing us to share paths filled with uncertainty but also ignited by mutual support and understanding. Life may not be a neatly wrapped sitcom, but as we both learned, it can be just as beautiful to find warmth in familiar ties. I figured sharing my journey on a Reddit thread could lead to further connections and reflections, so I posted under Confessions, hoping to find others who felt similarly. The supportive feedback rolled in, weaving a new network of friendships across the digital expanse. The Comfort Show had not only offered me solace but introduced me to a community that mirrored the support I truly needed. In retrospect, I realized that while we may never achieve the perfection portrayed on screen, embracing our flawed but vibrant stories transforms mere comfort into genuine courage. The cozy moments tend to hold the most strength, don't they? After all, life is a series of episodes, each rich in its small imperfections and lessons, echoing through laughter and connection. What more could one ask for in the grand script of our lives? As I settled back into my usual routine, I found myself reflecting on the warmth the show had brought into my life, a warmth that seemed to resonate long after the closing credits rolled. I remember binge-watching the series late at night, the glow from the screen wrapping around me like an old, comforting blanket. But it wasn't just the storyline that captivated me, it was the profound sense of understanding I felt from the characters who faced their own struggles, triumphs, and moments of vulnerability. They became friends I never met, existing in a world where flaws were celebrated rather than hidden. Each time I started another rewatch, the familiar dialogue and laughter flowed through my apartment as if it had seeped into every corner, transforming my space into a sanctuary away from the chaos outside. I began sharing my experience with this series on an online forum, weaving together the intricate details of my own life with those of the characters. I reminisced about how the protagonist, with their struggles to find balance between work and relationships, echoed my own internal battles. When I pressed send on my post, I felt a sense of dread, waiting for either silence or criticism, but instead, my inbox flooded with sympathetic messages and stories from others who felt the same. Each interaction became a moment of connection, reminding me that we are all spinning in our own orbits yet inevitably drawn to one another, like planets in a grand cosmic dance. But it was during one late-night reply to a fellow user, their story similar to mine, their struggles palpable, that a twist emerged. They shared how this comfort show had inadvertently helped them cope with their own mental health issues, and it struck a chord in me. I thought of the nights I had sat paralyzed by anxiety, the series lightening my heavy heart, and suddenly felt compelled to give back in some small way. I began organizing virtual watch parties, inviting all those who had reached out, creating a space where we could engage over our shared love for the show. The first gathering felt electric. I could almost hear the pulse of the collective as laughter erupted with every punchline and nostalgic moment. We traveled through our favorite episodes together, voices overlapping in a joyful cacophony of commentary, and in those moments, something remarkable happened. I felt a shift. The heaviness that had lingered in my chest for months began to slip away, replaced by the buoyancy of new friendships forged in the glow of our beloved series. Each gathering deepened our connections, unraveling layers of vulnerability, humor, and warmth, and we soon found ourselves discussing everything from life dreams to fears, so intimate and real it felt surreal. But as the weeks passed and winter settled in outside my window, I noticed one of the participants, Jamie, grew quiet. Their laughter had once been infectious, but during our last meeting, it felt distant, as if a shadow had fallen over their spirit. Concerned, I reached out privately, checking in and sharing my worry. It wasn't long before Jamie replied, spilling their heart out in a series of messages. They spoke of feeling lost, adrift in a world that seemed increasingly isolating, weighed down by expectations, and how the solace they found in our gatherings had begun to feel like a highlight against the drudgeries of life. Suddenly, I realized I wasn't just the spectator of my show anymore, I was an active participant in someone else's story. I suggested we have a one-on-one call where we could talk openly, just the two of us. That night, as we spoke, a vulnerability emerged, raw and beautiful. Jamie shared their dreams of pursuing art, their struggles with rejection, and their longing for connection. I listened intently, offering encouragement and sharing my own fears of inadequacy, and as the conversation flowed, it felt like we were crafting our own narrative, one of resilience and hope. Days turned into weeks, and Jamie and I became inseparable during our virtual meetups. With each discussion, we stretched out our dreams and uncertainties like threads, weaving them into something new and vibrant. Inspired by our dynamic, we decided to host a live episode commentary on our favorite parts, creating a new series of posts for those in the community to join us. It was a success. The chatrooms lit up with excitement, the joy felt like fireworks bursting across a darkened sky. In the end, Jamie and I both realized something profound, that our comfort show, while cherished, was never truly the star of the universe. It was the friendships born from it that shone the brightest. Reflecting on this journey, I smiled, knowing that sometimes the most transformative moments come not from the escapism of a favorite episode, but from the connections we foster while embracing our imperfections with courage. Life, after all, had become its own blend of sitcom unpredictability and heartfelt emotional depth, and I was more than ready for the next season to begin. Even amid the uncertainty, I knew, as the credits rolled on this chapter of our story, there was always room for another laugh, another episode, and another friend. I could hardly wait to see what came next, ready to watch the unfolding tapestry of our lives together, the comfort show continuing to inspire us in ways we were only just beginning to understand. In the days that followed, the haze of uncertainty began to lift. I found myself immersed in the online community crafted around our beloved comfort show. Late-night discussions bubbled with animated spontaneity and earnest reflections, while the threads of personal anecdotes intertwined with favorite scenes and shared quotes, forming a tapestry of camaraderie both sweet and reassuring. It was a safe haven. During one particularly quiet evening, I curled up on my couch wearing my favorite oversized sweatshirt, the glow of my laptop illuminating my excitedly furrowed brows. I opened a thread titled Life Lessons from My Comfort Show, and the posts poured in, mirroring our myriad experiences through our shared lens. I read about someone who had lost their job but found the courage to chase their dream of starting a bakery, channeling the spirit of the quirky character we all loved who had redefined failure into a zesty journey of personal reinvention. I smiled at the words of another, who had battled anxiety by replicating the show's unpredictable bravery through small, conscious steps in their daily life. It was like witnessing a series of life scripts intertwining with our favorite sitcom moments, each anecdote brimming with vulnerability and hope. As I watched the clock slide past midnight, a sense of anticipation electrified the air, urging me to take the plunge. A post began forming in my mind, a confession of sorts, combining my personal struggles and an honest tribute to the influence the show had had on my life. With deliberate movements, I started typing. I wrote about how comforting it was to have my own version of that friend from the show who nudged me to embrace spontaneity, urging me to venture out into life rather than waiting for it to come to me. I unconsciously penned down how the catchphrases hovering in our lexicon had shifted from being mere jokes to becoming mantras I whispered to myself during panic-stricken moments. Each sentence flowed easily, my fears spilling out in delicate bursts of honesty. The screen glowed brightly as I finally typed, "In a world painted with anxiety and uncertainties, I find solace in our shared laughter, the connection through flawed characters who echo my own story. Sometimes, I dare to hope I can embody their courage, even if just a little." Once posted, I didn't expect much, anticipating the regular ebb and flow of online life. Yet, within hours, my notifications began to light up like a festival of digital camaraderie. People were sharing their own reflections, building this comforting bridge between their narratives and mine. I found sort of a strange magic in the shared vulnerabilities, the strengths and weaknesses in our piece of the comfort show's vast landscape. Every reply added a new glimmer of hope, a ripple of joy punctuated with laughter. One response, in particular, caught my eye, a message from someone named Jamie, who relayed how they had started their own podcast to discuss similar themes, referencing an episode that mirrored my confession. They wrote, "Let's collaborate. It feels like our stories could guide one another." I realized then that sometimes, behind a computer screen, extraordinary connections form from the simplest of words. As weeks turned into months, Jamie and I began our collaboration, diving deep into the themes interwoven in our lives and our comfort show. We created a small but passionate audience who resonated with our stories of awkwardness, courage, love, and friendship. The podcast blossomed, allowing both of us to explore our thoughts and feelings publicly yet intimately, as if we were peeling back the layers of vulnerability together, like two characters in our very own heartwarming episode. With each new recording session, I could feel my initial hesitations melt away, replaced by an eagerness to share my voice, to really continue unearthing our collective humanity. I often reflected on this new dynamic, how our lives, much like our comfort show, contained humor and depth, a balance that felt both comforting and exhilarating to explore. Every new guest we interviewed infused our conversations with fresh perspectives, spiraling us into meaningful discussions that bubbled with joy and authenticity. But more importantly, they served as gentle reminders of the quirks that make our stories uniquely ours. And then there came a day unlike any other, where our podcast reached a significant milestone, our 100th episode. It felt surreal, almost unreal, celebrating an anniversary where each part of our journey was woven through the echoes of laughter, inspiration, and healing. That night, as Jamie and I recorded, there was an electricity in the air, a blend of nervous energy and vibrant hope. I spoke a little deeper that time, relaying to our listeners how we began this journey amid uncertainties and doubts, drawing strength from the comfort show that had first inspired me to be braver than I felt. Sitting in that small recording room, surrounded by all the memories we had accumulated thus far, moments where we forged our friendship, advocated for one another, and crafted honest discussions that opened our hearts, I knew this was more than just a podcast. It was a living, breathing testament to the connections we forge when we step into the light of vulnerability. As I signed off that night, a comforting thought echoed in my mind: no matter what the next season holds, I have found my rhythm in this episodic journey called life, hand in hand with newfound friends echoing the lessons of our beloved characters. I drifted to sleep that night filled with a warm sense of purpose, ready for whatever came next, ready to embrace it all without fear, knowing that each chapter was merely a beautiful interplay of shared experiences and laughter, another episode in the vast melodrama of our imperfect existence. And this was simply the beginning. It was just another late night scrolling through Reddit when I stumbled across the thread that would change everything. Ask Reddit, what are your thoughts on a Reddit-wide ban of X links? The post sparked a debate that ignited something deep within me, intertwining my own life with the virtual chaos of the comments section. My name is Charlie, and like many, I had considered Reddit my refuge, a place where I could hide from the anxieties of daily life. At that moment, though, I was navigating a personal storm. You see, my best friend, Sam, had become obsessed with a specific self-help subreddit that peddled dubious life hacks and questionable motivational quotes. I had seen him spiral deeper into these threads, losing touch with the real world around him. The advice was not only impractical, it blurred the line between inspiration and delusion, and Sam had started to believe every word. I felt like the lone survivor in a sinking ship while everyone around me, including him, jumped overboard for half-formed ideas that only left them floundering. My concern transformed into an internal conflict that crept up on me, whispering questions I was too afraid to voice. Should I intervene? Would it damage our friendship if I called out his fascination with this unyielding stream of pseudoscience? I could envision myself approaching him, a trembling figure trying to pierce through the dense fog of his newfound faith in the absurd. Each day bled into the next, my heart caught in a loop of empathy and frustration as I watched him drift farther away from the person I had known. It wasn't just his obsession. It was how it began to tarnish our connection. Texts went unanswered, our gaming nights cancelled. I felt like a ghost, haunting the remnants of a friendship that was rapidly fading. I wondered if anyone else felt what I was feeling, if any of these Redditors had the same sinking sensation as they typed their opinions, each keystroke echoing with a mix of reasoning and desperation that matched my own chaotic thoughts. Then came the night that everything boiled over. I dropped by unannounced, hoping to break through the barrier he had built around himself. When I walked into his room, it was a shrine to these self-help articles, walls plastered with quotes that floated tentatively on the surface of his reality, mocking our childhood dreams of adventure and inspiration. I stood there, a spectator in my own friend's life, until the wave of disappointment washed over me and crashed into words. Sam, this stuff isn't helping you. You're acting like you've found the magic potion to happiness, but I can't watch you drown in it. You're losing yourself. The silence that followed felt eternal. A chasm carved out by every unread message and every void he had created by immersing himself in the threads of empty promises. The look in his eyes was a mixture of surprise, anger, and something that resembled the fading glimmer of understanding. My heart raced as I prepared. For conflict, I only hoped he could see the friendship behind my words, rather than just the accusation. I wanted our bond intact, yet I knew that sometimes, voicing your fears brings clarity, even at the risk of rupture. To my surprise, he didn't lash out. Instead, after a long pause that felt like a spine-tingling eternity, he let out a breath I didn't know he was holding. I guess I didn't recognize it until now. He confessed that he felt lost among the noise of countless suggestions. Our conversation meandered slowly, layers of our friendship peeling back to reveal the insecurities and fears that shaped us both. The tension eased, and I felt a flicker of hope as he began to recognize that the community he had wrapped himself in didn't have the roadmap he needed. Over the next few weeks, we designed a plan together, an amalgamation of our own dreams and the wisdom we had learned through navigating stormy seas in the real world. We started with modest goals and allowed each other the grace to try and fail. As Sam and I began carving new paths together, I watched the sinister grip of that obsessive subreddit ease its hold over him. With each setback, conversations became raw yet enlightening, weaving back the threads of companionship that made our bond stronger. It was a journey of rediscovery through shared vulnerability, a reminder of the importance of real interactions over the churning tides of an online community. Looking back, I can't help but feel thankful for that thread, for the way it pushed me to address my worries. Sometimes it takes a catalyst to kickstart the slow journey back to clarity, whether in life or in friendships. I also made a note to follow the ongoing discussion because I realized that we're all navigating our own unique challenges, even those we can't see. Fast forward several months, and Sam is thriving, taking intrinsic steps fueled not by misguided life hacks but by genuine connections and shared experiences. As for me, I learned that sometimes, love and honesty walk hand in hand, leading us to significant change in those we hold dear. I still scroll through Reddit late at night, but now the screen feels a little more alive, much like my friendship with Sam. Sometimes I wonder how many others are waiting for a nudge, and I hope they find the strength to speak up, just as I did. Perhaps in every online debate, there's a little piece of life waiting to be unraveled, stitched together with the threads of compassion. And those are the moments worth savoring. It was just another evening, the kind where the sun dipped low in a sky bruised with shades of orange and pink, casting a soft glow through my window as I settled down with my laptop. The familiarity of the warm light enveloped me, kindled by the comfort of my worn-out favorite blanket. I opened Reddit, my usual sanctuary, the place where countless stories waited to be unearthed. As I scrolled, I happened upon a post that caught my eye. Ask Reddit, what are your thoughts on a Reddit-wide ban of X links? I could almost envision the heated debates already brewing, a digital tempest tucked away within the screens of frustrated and passionate commenters. I could feel the same pull that drew me to Sam that day, the desire to spark conversation and tease out the complexities hidden within seemingly simple questions. Reading through the flurry of responses, I found myself immersed in various perspectives, some people pleading for change, arguing against an oversaturation of a specific disreputable link type, while others embodied the quintessential Reddit spirit of rebellion, insisting that freedom of expression should trump the inconvenience of filtering out the noise. The debate felt visceral and vital, echoing the very conversations I had with Sam when he opened up to me about his struggles. It made me reflect deeply on our small circle dynamics in a larger digital landscape. As I began typing my own comment, I noticed a thread that spoke about the weight of online presence and how not everyone felt valued within these expansive communities. It made me think of Sam again, and how our talks had unearthed layers of vulnerability tucked away behind his laid-back demeanor. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I paused, contemplating how my words might resonate with someone who needed them just as I had needed Sam's honesty. I recounted my experiences of feeling lost in a sea of opinions and how it often took a single nudge to recognize the importance of speaking up, a reminder that every virtual voice had the potential to amplify someone's reality. I felt a surge of purpose, realizing that even while wrapped snugly within the digital ether, there existed a sacred connection among us all, a web of humanity transcending screens and avatars. As I hit post, I sighed, feeling a mix of nervousness and relief. Would my words spark reflection, perhaps even inspire someone to courageously confront a hidden truth? I returned to scrolling, my heart beating gently in tandem with the rhythm of familiar comments and discussions. Hours passed like slow-moving clouds, and yet it felt as if each moment wove another thread into the fabric of my night. When fatigue began to set in, I scrolled to the top of the thread one final time, pausing at my original comment. It was alive, buried beneath a cascade of new replies. To my surprise, a series of thoughtful reflections unfurled in response to my simple nudge, a ripple effect echoing the very change I celebrated with Sam. People were sharing their own experiences, confessing to moments of doubt where they'd felt overlooked, or admitting they had long shelved their thoughts because they were afraid of being banned from discussions altogether. Suddenly, I felt less like a spectator and more like a participant in an ongoing dialogue. It was in those moments that I realized there was tremendous power in the mundane swap of hypothetical questions and shared traumas that unfolded in Forums like these. 12 new notifications chimed, and I opened them one by one, feeling this gentle warmth swelling within me like the cozy embrace of my blanket. Every response revealed another story, another life that had shifted in some way, shaped by connection and understanding, even strangers acknowledging shared fears, laughter shared over memes, or heartfelt apologies raining down in the wake of misunderstandings. As I finally prepared to close my laptop, a comment stood apart, resonating deep within me. "Thank you for reminding me I am not alone. I've been afraid to share my opinion on X because I didn't think anyone would care." It felt like a small victory in a vast sea of anonymity, to know that perhaps my words had found a home in someone's heart. A soft smile crept across my face as realization settled in that this digital space could be an oasis from the world's coldness, a realm where compassion thrived, just like the companionship I had found with Sam. Slipping into bed, I let the day's conversations weave into my dreams, and I thought of how often we confine ourselves within imaginary barriers while the universe pulses around us, inviting us to let go and embrace the voices that dance in the shared air. It occurred to me that sometimes, love and honesty could extend beyond our immediate circles, reaching out through the vastness of the internet, waiting patiently for those brave enough to grasp them. Yes, it was a lovely evening after all, both in the digital realm and in my soul, and as I drifted off, I held on to the hope that tomorrow might bring another story worth telling, reminding me anew of the power of our connections, wherever they may live. The next day, I found myself wandering through the familiar threads of my favorite subreddits, my heart slightly lighter than it had been before. There was something comforting about diving into the stories of strangers, each post radiating a raw vulnerability that could resonate with the loneliest of souls. I clicked on a thread titled "What are your thoughts on a Reddit-wide ban of X links?" Instead of the usual memes and snarky comments, the replies were a tapestry of experiences showing just how intertwined our lives could be. People were discussing issues related to the controversial links, which often led to discussions about relationships, trust, and the very essence of sharing our experiences online. One user, who I later learned was named Hannah, shared a heartfelt confession about a past betrayal that had occurred because of one such link. Her story struck a chord in me. She wrote about a friend who had shared a private moment publicly, and how it shattered their trust beyond repair. As I read through her narrative, I felt her pain, a visceral ache that I remembered too well from my own experiences with Sam. The comments turned into a collective therapy session, each new reply revealing layers of hurt and healing. People began to share their own stories of loss and redemption, and as the thread blossomed, so did my understanding of how intricate and fragile our digital connections were. With each response, it became increasingly clear how our interactions shaped not just our online lives but our real-world ones too. I felt a tug at my heart when Hannah updated her post to share that she had reached out to her friend after years of silence. She was ready to embrace the vulnerability of forgiveness. In that moment, I realized that perhaps those threads, the ones filled with debates and discussions, were not just pixels on a screen but lifelines connecting us to the essence of what it means to be human. They were invitations to explore deeper themes of empathy, understanding, and the complexity of relationships. Late that night, as I snuggled deeper under my blanket, I had the sensation of unveiling hidden threads of compassion and resilience. Beneath the surface of online discussions, there was a current of connectedness, providing warmth in the cold anonymity of the internet. It felt like I was tapping into something much larger, a shared humanity woven through our stories. My mind drifted back to my friendship with Sam and how our candid conversation had nurtured a garden of trust where none had stood before. I hoped that somehow, I could be the nudge for someone else, just as you might find that flickering light in a dim room. The idea filled me with a tranquil sense of purpose, and I drifted off to sleep once more, eager for what morning might unfold in this ever-evolving dialogue of life and connections. The next morning, I woke up with a peculiar sense of urgency, driven by the desire to share the power of honesty and compassion. I penned down my thoughts about the previous night's thread, capturing the spirit of understanding that flowed through the comments where Hannah had bravely laid bare her heart. I titled my post, "Sometimes, Healing Comes from Unexpected Places." I wrote not just to share my experience, but to remind the world that our voices matter, that even in our vulnerability, we hold the keys to connection and healing. A flood of responses came in, the kind that reinforced my belief in the goodness of our collective spirit. Many users poured their hearts out, sharing experiences of estrangement, reconciliation, and the various shades of love that had shaped their lives. I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over me as I read through the heartfelt messages. There was a comment from a user named Mark that caught my eye. "I've been so scared to talk to my sister after what happened between us. I think I'll finally reach out. Thank you for this. At that moment, I realized this little act of sharing might have a ripple effect, nudging someone toward courage, just like my connection with Sam had. Later in the day, I received a direct message from Hannah, thanking me for my post. She told me she had sat down with her friend, and they had both ended up crying over coffee, airing the grievances that had festered for far too long, and began to mend what they thought was irreparably broken. It struck me how interconnected our lives truly were, threads weaving through one another, forming patterns of sorrow and joy. Each interaction, every reply, was a whispered invitation to open up, to engage, and ultimately, to heal. For the first time in a long while, the universe felt like it was affirming my existence, holding up a mirror to reflect the shared stories and triumphs over adversity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I took a moment to reflect on how far we'd all come, in our little corners of the internet and within the overlaps of our lives. It dawned on me that no matter how daunting the world could seem, we had the power to bring light to dark places, share warmth in cold corners, and cultivate understanding from vulnerability. Maybe every post was a chance for connection, a potential to stir something deep within the hearts of others. The universe was still out there, waiting to be embraced, and as I tucked into bed that night, I couldn't help but smile softly, thinking of all the stories yet to unfold, the lives yet to touch, and the love that would ripple far beyond what I could see. I held close the hope that tomorrow might again bring forth another connection threaded with compassion, another invitation to lean into our shared humanity, and perhaps even a few more moments worth savoring. It's funny how life can seem so normal one minute and then unravel completely the next. I remember sitting in my living room, maybe a week into the lockdown, the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders like I was being buried alive. My name is Sam, and I had always been the type of person who thrived on routine, working from home when I was given the chance, taking my daily strolls to the coffee shop just 2 blocks away, and settling into my cozy chair every evening to read or binge watch whatever captivating show I could find. The silence that enveloped my neighborhood during those first few days of the COVID lockdown felt almost foreign. It was like the world had pressed pause on the very fabric of our lives, and what should have been a simple moment of quiet turned into an unsettling void that echoed in my chest. My phone buzzed incessantly with news updates, family group chats, and the occasional Zoom invitation, further drawing me into a vortex of uncertainty, but I didn't want to join those calls. I didn't want to see smiling faces that felt haunted by the anxiety we all shared. What was meant to be a temporary setback had soon launched me into what felt like a living nightmare, my isolation only deepening as the days rolled into weeks. But as the months passed, I slowly began to adapt to this strange new reality. I started sharing my thoughts on Reddit, joining various communities to find solace among strangers, pouring out my feelings about the lockdowns, and sharing my experiences of loneliness and frustration. That's where I met Lucy, someone who felt equally lost and bewildered by it all. She lived several states away, her life similarly altered. Our conversations drifted from light banter to deeper reflections about loss and hope. Sharing snippets of our daily lives became our safe haven. She talked about her love for painting and the vibrant colors that often eluded her during the lockdowns, while I found comfort in her words and began putting my thoughts onto paper. What had started as a way to escape turned into a blossoming friendship. We began video chatting nightly, our laughter filling what had once been an empty void. The refracted sunlight streaming through my window as I sat on the floor with my laptop felt warm. It illuminated not only my space but also the corners of my heart that had dimmed. I had not anticipated feeling this connection during a time rife with uncertainty. Yet, as time marched on, I found myself wrestling with something I hadn't expected, the weight of a burgeoning affection for Lucy. It was undeniable, and with every shared late-night confession, my heart ached with the gravity of feelings unspoken. Would revealing my feelings jeopardize the solace we'd built together? The internal conflict tugged at my mind incessantly. I didn't want to ruin the one thing that had brought color back into my life, and still, I longed to tell her just how much she meant to me. One evening, as we talked about the future and the world reopening, I felt the courage swell within me like the tide swelling under the moonlight. In a raw moment of honesty, I confessed my feelings and admitted the delicate dance of hope that had taken hold of my heart. To my relief, she was quiet for a moment, and then smiled, her eyes sparkling with the very same vulnerability. It turned out she had felt the spark too, unsure how to voice it amid the chaos surrounding us. As the lockdowns began to lift and the world cautiously re-emerged from the shadows, so did our friendship blossom into something more profound. We planned to meet, finally collapsing the distance that had once kept us apart. That day arrived, the sun shining brightly in stark contrast to the rain clouds of the past year, and I remember pacing nervously in a small park where we agreed to meet. When I saw her walking toward me, there was an electrifying jolt in the air as if time had paused for just a moment. The laughter and love we had built from screens now resonated through the rustling of leaves and the soft chirping of birds around us. The discussions that spanned evenings and wrapped around our hearts became rich conversations in person, and in those quiet moments, I realized how much I had yearned for human connection. We embraced, and it felt as if I was breathing life for the first time after gasping for air. Reflecting now, it's surreal to think about how COVID was a catalyst, a strange and terrifying tragedy that somehow led me to Lucy, who now stands by my side as we navigate this post-lockdown era together. Life shifted dramatically during those months, and when I envision that time, I think of more than just isolation. I think of finding love, rediscovering passion and creativity, and rekindling the simple joys like the warmth of laughter. And to answer that imagined question in 25 years about life during the lockdown, I'll say it was during those dark days that I found the light in unexpected places, and, more importantly, within myself, igniting a flame that continues to burn, reminding me that even the darkest of nights can lead to a brilliant dawn. Update: a few months later, Lucy and I are doing well together, our bond stronger than ever. We've even started collaborating on some artistic projects, blending her painting with my writing, and it feels incredible to work side by side, creating new worlds together. As the world around us seems to find its rhythm again, I remain ever grateful for the quiet moments that led me to this exhilarating chapter of life, and I often remind myself that sometimes, amidst chaos, you can stumble into something beautiful and unexpected. As I sit here in the soft morning light filtering through our cluttered studio, I can't help but reflect on how far we've come since those uncertain days of lockdown. The space is filled with the heady scent of paint and freshly brewed coffee, a mixture that feels like home now, and it's easy to forget that just a few months ago, even stepping outside felt like a gamble. Lucy is perched on her stool, her paintbrush dancing across the canvas, lost in her world of colors and textures while I type furiously on my laptop, trying to capture the essence of our journey in words. There's an unspoken understanding between us, a rhythm that seems to sync our creative energies into a harmonious flow, and I often pause to watch her. The way her brow furrows in concentration and the soft smile that breaks through when she's particularly pleased with a stroke reminds me of everything we've learned in the chaos of those months apart. Our bond was forged in that strange silence of the lockdown, when we were forced to face ourselves and the depth of our emotions. Even when the world outside grew louder with conflicting narratives and demands for normalcy, Lucy and I carved out our own little sanctuary, one filled with art, laughter, and honest conversations. I can still recall the tension of those early days, the screen time stretching endlessly, the dread of the unknown gnawing at my stomach, and the conversations that oscillated between overly optimistic and painfully honest. I remember one evening in particular, where the weight of isolation hung heavy in the air. Lucy had called me, worry draping her voice like a thick fog. She spoke of loneliness, of dreams deferred, and fears bubbling just below the surface. I listened, feeling helpless from afar, but it was in this raw exchange that we unearthed our shared insecurities, and both of us started to voice the longing for connection. Slowly, we began a ritual of sorts. Every evening at 6, we would meet virtually, sharing snippets of our days, our worries, and our hopes, gradually stitching the gaping holes that distance created in our hearts. The soft glow from our screens became a lifeline. Over time, conversations turned into creative exchanges, and before I knew it, we were nurturing something that went beyond friendship. The moment we decided to collaborate, it felt like a blossoming flower, effortlessly unfolding, revealing colors and patterns we never knew existed. Once we began blending our arts, her vibrant, swirling colors complementing my stories that danced with emotion, we uncovered a new facet of our relationship. Each painting sparked a narrative, each poem inspired a vivid scene, and it felt as if we were building a bridge from our separate lives to one shared together, alive with inspiration. Today, as I watch her mix cobalt blue with hints of emerald, I can't shake off the gratitude that washes over me. I realize that those long, isolating nights ultimately gifted us with clarity, to see each other not only as creators but as partners navigating this unpredictable world. I wouldn't change a thing. As our brushes glide across the canvases, Lucy meets my gaze, a spark of mischief in her eyes. "Did you think the lockdown would lead to us being an art duo?" she asks, and I chuckle, shaking my head. I never saw the turning points as clearly back then, lost as I was in the noise of uncertainty. Now, with each stroke shared between us, I'm awash in the beauty of this unexpected journey. I muse over where we will go from here, as life continues to ebb and flow beyond the four walls of our studio. There are projects we hope to pursue together, displays at local galleries, eventually a joint exhibition where our creations can converse with each other in a shared space. Perhaps even a published collection, where her art meets my words, a testament of our intertwined paths forged through adversity. And on days when the world feels overwhelming, I find comfort in reminding myself that our bond emerged from that stillness, that even from chaos, we can arrive at harmony. As I finish my thoughts, the soft chime of Lucy's laughter drifts through the air, followed by the gentle swishing of her paintbrush. Just then, I feel a stir of anticipation, a realization that whatever life has in store for us next, we will embrace it together, as a team, holding on to the knowledge that even the most daunting circumstances can lead to the most beautiful beginnings. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, our little sanctuary of creativity flourished, much like the vibrant blossoms sprouting in the garden outside our window. The sunlight poured into our shared space, illuminating the canvas that had begun to sprout Lucy's imaginative strokes, while my words transformed into stories that danced around her art, creating a tapestry of color and emotion. I still remember the day we decided to tackle something new together. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, the kind where the world seemed to hold its breath, and everything beyond our walls faded away. An impulsive idea took root amidst our laughter. Let's create a children's book filled with whimsical tales and striking illustrations, tales that could whisk young readers away to fantastical realms where anything was possible. But as the proposal took shape, so did a wave of uncertainty wash over me. What if the story I wove wasn't good enough for her art? What if my words overshadowed her beautiful brushwork, or worse, became flat under the weight of her brilliance? I watched her with wonder, her subject matter shifting fluidly between animals, landscapes, and whimsical creatures, each piece brimming with joy, and I couldn't help but question whether I was worthy of sharing this labor of love with someone so gifted. All of this churned inside me, a silent struggle against the rising tide of my own insecurities, until one evening, unable to contain it anymore, I laid my concerns bare, the vulnerability raking over me like a chill wind. "Lucy," I whispered, catching her mid-stroke, "what if my writing isn't enough to match your art? What if I ruin it?" She paused, met my gaze with her vivid eyes that held challenges and reassurances in equal measure, and said, "But it won't be about adequate or inadequate, it'll be about us, about our story. We're crafting something uniquely ours." In those words, like a gentle tide washing away the remnants of my doubt, I felt a surge of excitement swell within me. Our project wasn't merely a collaboration, it was a blend of our souls, forged from the fragility of uncertainty yet buoyed by the strength of companionship. So we dove in headfirst, spending countless hours immersed in inspiration, often losing track of time as we shared ideas and sketches, our laughter echoing through the cozy corners of our home. The world outside resumed its relentless pace, but within our bubble, we existed in a realm of creativity that felt blissfully untouched by chaos. As the book began to take shape, I found a rhythm, a harmonious connection emerging not only through our art and stories but in the deeper understanding of one another that we nurtured. During this time, I realized just how much I had feared vulnerability. I had barricaded myself behind walls built from self-doubt, never realizing how stifling and solitary those walls made me feel. In those late hours, bathed in the warm glow of string lights we had hung above our workspace, Lucy and I unraveled and stitched back together, revealing fragments of our pasts and dreams that previously lay dormant. One night, while we took a break, sprawled out on our living room floor, I felt an overwhelming urge to put pen to paper and write a letter addressed to the future readers of our book, a message filled with hope and encouragement for children who might feel lost or lonely, just as I had felt for a long time. It became a love letter not just to them, but to our journey, defining the importance of authenticity and the magic born from shared creativity amidst uncertainty. That moment felt like a revelation, as if all the noise of the outside world melted away, leaving only the soft whisper of possibility in its wake. As we neared completion of our project, excitement blended seamlessly with nostalgia. I knew this endeavor would leave an imprint on my life, just as the lockdown had done, allowing me the space to reflect, grow, and ultimately, find my creative voice. And then came the day when we finally held the finished book in our hands, our combined efforts manifested between the covers. It was surreal, the colors seemed to leap off the pages, and the words danced in tandem with the illustrations, a perfect testament to how far we had come since that initial bonding over comfortable silence. My heart soared as I looked into Lucy's eyes, her pride reflected in a radiant smile that lit up her entire face. It was in that moment I understood that I was not just embracing what lay ahead but also honoring the beautiful past that had brought us together. As I ponder my experiences during those isolation days, I find solace reflecting that remarkable connection. one that blossomed from quiet homes and simple conversations, reminding me that amidst unknowns lie the seeds of unforgettable stories, woven together in love, creativity, and collaboration. And now, every time someone asks about the lockdown years, I can smile, not just because of the chaos that once filled the air, but because of the unexplored beauty it unearthed, something that continues to inspire us, urging me to create and dream, hand in hand with the person who taught me how to see magic in the mundane.